Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you watching third part of What If Naruto Was Bring Back to Life by Spirit King. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
With his icy gaze fixed on Tsunade, Ulquiorra surveyed the group. Well, who's the girl? Tsunade grinned but kept quiet. Ulquiorra saw the others, but after they indicated they would not speak, he became impatient. He said, "If you are not going to say anything, please leave," before going back to his job. Tsunade turned to face Hiashi, giving him a nod. Pen in hand, Ulquiorra glanced back up at her. He tilted his head in Hiashi's direction. They may be on the verge of saying Hinata. They would conclude that because I was drawn to her, I told her everything. Following a brief silence, Hiashi said, "It has been considered, and I offer my daughter Hinata." Ulquiorra would have grinned widely if he hadn't had the composure and aloofness of a statue. As it was, from somewhere inside his hollow hole, a warm feeling blossomed in his breast. He owned Hinata. She would never see Sasuke's touch. He continued to wear his iron mask, though. He still had to tell Hinata who he was, even though he knew they would seize any opportunity to control him. I was under the impression Hinata was engaged to Uchiha? Danzo raised his voice. Uchiha is of the opinion 3 wives is enough. Besides, he turned to Hiashi, Hyuga Hiashi has the right to choose Hinata's husband. He has reconsidered it and decided to offer you the opportunity. Ulquiorra cast a quick glance at Hiashi, who met his eyes. He was trying to get anything more out of them again, saying, "I fail to see why I should accept." Tsunade grinned. Well, Hinata reminds you of someone, and is a member of the Hyuga clan. For a man such as yourself, wouldn't it be of great help? It would solidify you here and make you a powerful man. Ulquiorra remained silent for a while. Tsunade looked from Ulquiorra to Danzo. Do you accept? The senior man inquired. Ulquiorra turned to face them once more. Like Naruto, he was dying to accept, but something stopped him. Is she being coerced into doing this, or does she want to? I ought to talk to her first. He held up one finger and said, "I will accept on 2 conditions. First, I'm talking to Hinata right now. Secondly," he gestured with another finger, "she agrees too." Hiashi appeared to think the second clause was fine. And, may I ask what Mitarashi is doing here? Tsunade nodded to an Enbu outside as she gave him a devious smile. I'm the chaperone. Ulquiorra did not relish the upcoming days. As Danzo and Tsunade departed, Hiashi said, "Cifer. San, may I speak with you while we wait for Hinata to arrive?" With a nod, Ulquiorra sat down opposite the 2 Konoha. Nin that remained. Cifer. San, how old is your clan? Ulquiorra gave a shrug. My clan only existed because of me. A gift for loyal service. These questions are to make sure I am capable of keeping Hinata in the style to which she is accustomed. Hiashi gave a nod. There are certain rules to these things. Have they not already been completed? You have already agreed to the match. Yes, but there is a protocol to follow. But it has been completed. Nobles, Enko rolled her eyes and moaned. Ulquiorra gave a slow nod of agreement. Hiashi leaned back and curled his fingers, saying, I know you are wealthy. You are powerful. And your Keke Genkai will provide for my grandchildren. Cifer. San, you understand how these things work? Partly. The marriage system in Hueco Mundo was not as sophisticated as it is here. Once the father and groom, or his representatives, have decided upon the date, the dowry is exchanged. Of course, I was hoping to discuss a change to these arrangements. Ulquiorra narrowed his eyes to meet the nobleman's gaze. Hinata is my heir. The next in line to the position of clan head. So, when I die, by default, you would become the head of the Hyuga. Ulquiorra stored this information for a rainy day. I'm sure it would come in handy later. Wouldn't it change from the Hyuga clan to the Cifer clan at that moment? No, this is what I wanted to speak to you about, Cifer. San. You have no clan. By marrying into the Hyuga, you would lose your own name. You would be a his is what I wanted to speak to you about, Cifer. San. You have no clan. By marrying into the Hyuga, you would become one. On the day of the marriage you will become Ulquiorra Hyuga. I would appreciate it if you would allow me to teach you our clan traditions. Ulquiorra had a quick thought. Refusing is not warranted. I could probably pick up some valuable knowledge. However, after disclosing myself to Hinata, I think I could pick up some knowledge from her. For Hinata's sake, I would also be comfortable with the Hyuga name. Very well, I accept. Good. There's one last thing though, Cifer. San. Whenever two Kekkei Genkai clans intermarry, there needs to be a record of the Kekkei Genkai that both possess. Ulquiorra took a quick look at Anko to make sure. She gave him a sympathetic nod. Ulquiorra leaned back in his chair, said, very well, and started to enumerate his skills. I have regeneration. Hierro, meaning I have iron. Hard skin. Flight. Recording eyes. Sonido, supersonic speed. And a secret. Hiyoshi's eyebrow went up. A secret. Consider it somewhat similar to your Haiden Jutsu. Hiyoshi gave a nod. And, one last thing, Cifer. San. If you hurt my daughter, I will kill you. Karen had to tell herself that Ulquiorra wanted the Haruno girl alive for the 20th time in the last 2 hours. After he kills Uchiha Teme, he intends to kill her. He desires to murder her directly. He desires to murder her directly. He desires to murder her directly. What about this dress? He desires to murder her directly. He desires to murder her directly. What do you think, Karen? Chan? That you require a fucking crowbar lobotomy. It's a little, Hinata. San, how would you put it? Excessive? The dress in question was an extremely formal kimono. Yes, that's it. It would suit Cho far better. She has the right look for that dress. The princess's outfit appeared to be something from a storybook. It didn't help that it was gold and decorated with pink dragons and fans. She had a more elegant and refined appearance when dressed simply. She gave Hinata a look. She was envious of the girl because she was attractive in every outfit. Cho, on the other hand, had the subtle beauty of a painting, and her tasteful, mainly formal attire transformed her into a modest yet alluring being. Haruno Sakura. Street prostitutes would appear more refined than her. It was hardly surprising that she had been drawn to the Hyuga girls since the start of the adventure. Thus far, the girl with the pink hair had dragged them to 12 different clothing stores, and Karen had been made to use her entitlement to a portion of Ulquiorra's money. It was not going to be good for him. Oh, come on, Karen. Chan. You would look great in this. Karen saw that she sidestepped the question she posed regarding Cho. The impoverished girl appeared just as dejected as she had been upon learning of Ulquiorra's life story. She'd developed a sort of friendship with Hinata, and, to be honest, she was beginning to see her as Ulquiorra had. Wit, compassion, gentleness, and an iron will. She was an exquisite lady. Tsunade and Danzo happened to stumble upon Sakura and Karen as she was attempting to coerce her into trying on a dress. Hello, girls. How is everything going? Well enough, Hokage. Sama. Tsunade smiled and nodded. Hinata, there have been developments. Karen took a sideways glance at Hinata, making sure Ulquiorra would remember this exchange. She almost fell to the ground at the next few words. What is it, Hokage? Sama? Your father has released you from your engagement to Uchiha San. Instead, if he agrees, you are to marry Ulquiorra. Karen became certain at that very moment that Ulquiorra was a relative or bastard of Ryo. Sama. How in the world was he able to be so lucky? Extremely confused, Hinata was escorted to Ulquiorra's office. Why would Dad consent to this? He was eager for me to wed Uchiha Teme so that I could have that Rinnegan imposter, but now he wants me to wed Ulquiorra? Yes, it's superior to Uchiha, but for what reason? I could still use this to persuade him to assist me in eliminating the council. Ulquiorra sat at his desk, wearing a sardonic expression. He appeared to have grown irritated with Anko. It did not surprise her. Anko was capable of that. She walked in, and Anko grinned broadly as he got to his feet. Her father got up from his seat, stepping aside the Jonin and giving her a quick glance. Shutting the door behind them, Tsunade and the others waited outside. With a sigh, Hinata took a seat across from Ulquiorra. Cifer. San, what am I doing here? The council has offered you as my wife. Hinata cried out, what? She was aware that this would occur at some point. Konoha was forced to offer Ulquiorra a wife because he was simply too strong. She had learned early on that the person she would marry would not be her first choice. She knew it had been unlikely, but she had hoped to wed Naruto. This was what life had taught her to expect. No, it was Ulquiorra's serene calm that really got to her. That and the fact that her father was once again rolling the dice with her, even though he had agreed. She genuinely believed Ulquiorra was above this. Don't panic, Hinata. I haven't decided yet. The deal is I will only go through with this if you agree to marry me. Pardon? Ulquiorra studied her intently, staring deep into her eyes until she trembled. I told you there was a girl in my past. And I look like her. He shut his eyes and then opened them once more. Well, that explained the eyes, she was blind. She was shy, gentle and the mother of my child. She had long hair of a dark hue and... He paused once more. Hinata realized that discussing this would probably be extremely difficult, if not physically impossible, for a man who walled himself off from the outside world. Ulquiorra, if it is too painful, you don't have to say anything. He continued. Most likely, he was eager to get it off his chest or hadn't hurt her. We met a few years after I left the commune. She was a prisoner of a gang. She offered herself to me if I freed her. I was young and my desire for a woman overruled my sense of respect for decorum, Hinata said softly. Yes. Once I freed her, she traveled with me. She had no choice. I had to hunt for her and protect her. When I felt the desire, I used her. Somewhere along the line, we grew to know each other. We, here his lips were slightly twisted, fell in love. She died not long after giving birth to our daughter. The child died just before her. She never realized it, as she held her in her arms. Once the souls were released, I consumed them. He looked at her with dark eyes, sad. I would be lying if I said your appearance didn't have some influence. I apologized to Naruto. Kun. I don't want to use this as a way to control him, but if I can get his assistance. I suppose it's better than marrying Uchiha, she replied. I should say though. You were in love as well, and nothing can fill that void. I know. The council had better be told. Ulquiorra and Hinata sat in his manor's office, Ulquiorra getting as close to Hinata's state of distress as possible. Congratulations. Like rain, questions and more fell upon them. After exchanging a few more words in private with Ulquiorra, Hiyashi left the room with a puzzled expression. The married women of the council and the offices had showered Hinata with counsel and tips. Ulquiorra, who she could tell was growing increasingly irate, seemed to be ignoring most of the talks about the marriage pact and the engagement as she and Ulquiorra were paraded around. Finally, Ulquiorra had silenced them all with, I'm sorry, but this is business ended. I'd like to talk to my fiancé privately. After Sony doing her to his room, Ulquiorra brought her some tea. She accepted it gratefully and took a sip. Ulquiorra, meantime, was deeply divided within. I'm going to marry Hinata. However, she is unwilling to. She won't have to try, but she will try to use me as leverage to fight Konoha. Which course of action would be best? It probably wouldn't work to just tell her who I am, and it might even make her leave me. I'm not going to have that. Ulquiorra made the decision to go against caution for the first time in his life. Reaching up, he took out his eye, saying, Hinata, I need to show you something. He crushed her protesting gasp, ignoring it. A flashback of memories. A blur of disorganized visuals, partially experienced feelings, and icy gazes. Lips against theirs like petals of a flower. A sensation in their limbs similar to agony. Soul. Numbing isolation for millennia, centuries upon centuries of trauma. The mask covering his face kept his lips against his ghost. I love you, Naruto. Kun. Hinata sat transfixed. Delirium. She was completely crazy. Yes, that was the only thing. She was completely crazy. Slowly at first, but then ever so quickly, fat tears streamed down her face. Her face was contorted in a mixture of happiness, grief, agony, and exhilaration. Her eyes were red, and her nose was bubbling with a little mucus. NN Naruto. Kun? She uttered in a prayer. Like whisper. A snow. White hand, smeared with some of his eye's blood, touched her cheek. What is left of him? Naruto. Kun. Their mouths met, and she drew him into a hug. His iron mask did not come off, but his hole's pain revealed his true feelings. Her taste filled his mouth as her lips, as soft as downy feathers, touched him. His left hand slid up her back and curled into her hair, his tongue curling around hers. With his will frozen, his other arm stayed fixed at his side. This had been his fantasy, the most prized possession of all his possessions, hidden away in the darkest corners of his soul for almost 3 millennia. And now here we were. I am not Naruto. She was putting herself down. She was planting a kiss on Naruto's opposite. An emotionless killer who lacked empathy, a heartless murderer, and... His melancholic thought process was interrupted by Hinata's tears as she released their kiss and buried her head in his neck's crook. W. What are you doing? He asked, startled. She sniffed and said, N. Naruto. Kun, you came back, obligingly answering the question. They remained in that position, encircled by each other, for almost 20 minutes. Glancing down at her crimson rimmed eyes, Ulquiorra muttered, Hinata, I'm not Naruto. Her lips found his neck. Why? Yes, you are. How else would you have all those memories? You're just a little different. His gaze locked with hers. They were so unlike from one another. His were frozen hatred and shards of emerald ice. Hers were goodness and lavender grief. Hinata, I'm not him. Her mouth moved to meet his. Yes, you are. Ulquiorra took a quick step back. Naruto was staring at him as if he were crazy. Hinata, please calm down. He was behaving illogically. After revealing his memories to her, he was now experiencing anxiety over his choice. It was acceptance, even joy, that was the response he was hoping for. And yet there he was, panicking like a fool without a brain. Hinata, on the other hand, was staring at him with a mix of shock, happiness, grief, and anguish. She tried to embrace him again, but he kept moving back, and her hands were shaking. With a look of betrayal in her eyes, Hinata looked at him. N. Naruto. Spitting out, I'm not Naruto, she pulled away from him, and he instantly regretted what he had said. Hinata, he said, extending his hand cautiously. Please, calm down. I'm sorry. Hinata leaned heavily on her desk and remained motionless. She had Naruto by her side. He gave Ulquiorra a sorrowful smile as he looked up. The memory vanished before Ulquiorra could reply, Bye. Bye, Ulquiorra. Kun. Ulquiorra was aware that the memory would vanish from his view. From now on, he would have to rely on his own feelings. His silent wish was for the memory to rest. Hinata, he began once more, please. He placed his hand over hers with a surprising lack of shyness. Her lips and skin were equally velvety. Hinata, I'm not the boy you fell in love with. She choked out, Yes you are, in between sobs. She placed a hand over his chest and lifted up his shirt, saying, People change over time. I'm not the same little girl I was 3 years ago. You've been gone so long. You're still a good person. In response, his hollow hole yawned. She placed her hands on either side and ran her fingers along its edges just before he raised his voice in protest. As her thin fingers slipped into his hole, he attempted to stop her but froze. He became rigid and walked straight ahead. Leaning forward, Hinata kissed the skin surrounding the hole while gazing into his eyes. The faint moan that came from his throat made her smile. It was both delightful and unexpected. Unaware that Hinata was doing so, their relationship was becoming closer as she touched Ulquiorra's soul. Ulquiorra steered her head quickly away from the hole as his breath quickened, giving him time to gather himself. I would not go so far as to call myself a good person. She said, You did what you needed to survive Naruto. Ulquiorra. He cherished the way his name sounded. When she kissed him this time, he gave in. And I saw all your memories. I know why you came back. He felt the sweetness of her breath on his lips as his hands slowly cupped her cheeks. She buried her hands in his hair. All that time, and you still loved me. His left hand drifted to her right and held her head, while his right hand moved to hold the back of her head, asking, we promised to wait for each other, didn't we? To surrender to this moment was so alien. To succumb to his feelings in this way. It was so odd of him to do so, and completely against his nature. But he would renounce his priceless principles and convictions for her. Ulquiorra promised that she would never allow Sasuke to hurt her, and they kissed for almost an hour while exchanging tender whispers and declarations of love. Hinata gave him a growl at these words and raised an eyebrow. She had somewhat recovered from her shy stutter, though he surmised that her stutter was only a result of her feelings for him. A minor eccentricity, if you will. You. Ulquiorra. Kun, can you help me save Cho? You don't need to ask. She is a family member. I take it father told you about how marrying me would change your name? Yes. Ulquiorra Hyuga, stated Hinata. It has a ring to it. With a flimsy smile, Hinata thanked her friends for coming. Ulquiorra was by her side, holding her hands. She had made a silent promise to spend as much time as possible by his side. There was a part of her that thought all of this was just a dream that the gods could easily take away from her. Shikamaru gave a flimsy smile and nodded. So, I hear congratulations are in order. You're clueless, Hinata remarked. She saw them all shoot side glances at one another. Oh, come on. You think that Ulquiorra has stolen my heart from Naruto? Tenten casually looked at their clasped hands. That's fair enough, Hinata responded. They were inside Ulquiorra's study at his manor. Karen, Jugo, and Suigetsu were also present. Upon their return, the trio of Yurei pledged allegiance to her. At the words, the crow had let out a cry of approval. She had kind of turned to Karen as a confidant. She had a close relationship with Ulquiorra and was well versed in his persona. She loved him with all of her heart, even though it was a little strange to think of him only as Ulquiorra rather than Naruto. She desired his happiness. She took a deep breath. There is something we need to talk about. We need to leave the village. A flurry of inquiries and expressions of astonishment ensued. At some point, Ulquiorra had to use his Ryatsu. The sensation of his energy enveloping her made her shiver with pleasure. Silence. Be silent. Thank you. I am aware of your plans for Konoha. Hinata. Chan told me about them. Luckily for you, they coincide with my own aims. I am going to help you destroy Konoha. While the Konoha 10 processed this, silence fell. After a while, Rock Lee talked. Hinata. Chan. Between them, Ulquiorra cast a glance. He reached up and, without saying a word, twisted his hand to reveal his past to them. They sat there in silence, staring at him in disbelieving shock before their quiet giggles and cries of joy broke out. I am Ulquiorra, once Naruto. I am back for blood. We escaped today. The scheme was underway. With concern, Shikamaru looked up at Ulquiorra. Are you sure this will work? It was a few hours after his true identity was revealed. There is a good chance of failure, but the odds are in our favor. Like Hinata, Shikamaru recognized that the essence of Naruto remained even though he was still new to Ulquiorra. He promised to always support his friend in order to atone for his past life's events. Within the Ulquiorra's office, they were robbing as many documents, letters, and maps as they could. The idea was to take them and divert Konoha's attention for a few days by setting up a false trail for a few influential council members. Here, Shikamaru's strategic genius and cunning came in very handy, enabling them to ensure that they took only what they needed. Following a tense exchange of words, Rock Lee and Jugo had discreetly left to deal with the guards. After a few broken noses and cracked necks, the manor was clear of hostile eyes. Meanwhile, Suigetsu and Tenten were conducting raids on the armory, setting up several unfavorable booby traps and pilfering whatever they could. They were now fighting about swords, or kunai. Meanwhile, everyone else was packing. Cleverly, they had made their way back to each of the houses, taking whatever they could carry back to the manor for Ulquiorra to carry. Even though he wouldn't have enough Sonito to move them all, he could still contain them with his sealing scrolls, and in this day and age, it was not unusual to see ninjas running across rooftops in Konoha. The crow examined this with her perceptive, keen eyes. This flock appealed to her. Their collaboration was fruitful. Hinata was in disbelief. Sho gave her a pained expression as he stared at her. "I'm sorry, Hinata." "Sama." Shaking her head, Hinata gave the branch girl an embrace. With a voice full of live hatred, she whispered, "I swear, we'll free you, and Sasuke will pay for what he did to you." "Thank you, and goodbye, Hinata." Chan. Ulquiorra watched while his friends put on backpacks and other gear. They had fulfilled his request and then some. All they could do now was wait for Hinata. During this time, he had swiftly reconnected with his friends and inquired about their lives during the previous few years. He was incredibly appreciative of their assistance to Hinata following his passing. He owed them a great deal. Soon after, Hinata reappeared, her expression contorted with rage. Hanabi trailed behind, each with a bulky backpack. "That bastard gave Uchiha the seal over Cho." Shoji questioned, "Meaning?" "He controls her utterly. She's his slave in every way." Ulquiorra's gaze twisted into slants of rage. "We will save her. Have no fear. You have my word. We will save Cho." Ulquiorra had already given a summary of their strategy and intended route. They all knew they needed allies and to train, even though none of them enjoyed the thought of escaping. They were far outclassed as it was. Each of the others had left a brief note stating their departure, but it was unclear why. They were prepared. As they stood in the garden, getting ready to leave, Ulquiorra's crow perched on her shoulder. "Hey there." Anko, Tucci, and all of their senseis were present. With the exception of the elderly chef, everyone was grinning and toting a sizable travel pack. "Mind if we tag along?" With a smile, Hinata gave Ulquiorra a quick glance. "I take it, Konoha is no longer your home? It is bad for our youthful souls." "I see. And you, Tucci?" He reached out and shook Ulquiorra's hand, saying, "I'm here to wish you luck, Cifer." "Sama. I'll be getting you allies as and how I can hear. You lot have your own aides and supporters." Ulquiorra and Hanabi exchanged a glance while Hanabi gripped her sister's hand. The crowd as a whole started to move in an instant. It was time to start the war. Danzo watched them go. He was unable to summon the strength to stop them for whatever reason. "Good luck, boy." Like flying shadows, they darted across the village at high speed. Occasionally, a guard would show up, but all curiosity was piqued when they saw the Jonin and a few white lies, before realizing who the others were. They appeared to be traveling to distant Iwa on a Hokage mission. Though his friends were constantly glancing at him, Ulquiorra's gaze was fixed forward, only occasionally straying to rest on Hinata. They moved in silence, cloaked in obscurity. Finally, after some time, they drew up against the closest outer wall. When they landed on top of it, Ulquiorra turned to face them. "We are heading south, towards Kiri." Asuma said, "You know that village that currently despises our guts, right?" He turned to Suigetsu and Tenten and said, "Yes. However, the Mizukage is a close associate. Besides, we left behind something to get the Mizukage on our side." Ulquiorra turned and gestured for them to ask. The blasts began far away, in the armory in the heart of Konoha. 12 Chunin were stationed outside the armory, eyes peeled and ears perked, with kunai and ninjakin in hand. With their katanas and spears ready, 20 Hano no Taikoku soldiers stood guard at the doors. Even for the modern era, this guard was heavier than usual. The little wet spot next to the quartermaster's office window and the tiny piece of missing wood from the mantel where a knife had been lodged had gone unnoticed. With their red armor glowing dully in the ruddy light of the torches in their hands and sconces, the guards were grumbling and laughing inaudibly. One had his friend's face crumpled with disgust as he told him a crude joke about a horse and 3 priestesses. One was giving financial advice to a friend. One was just looking at the stars. A soft hiss that sounded like a breath of air was heard coming from deep inside the armory. It originated from the tag stores, where hundreds of explosive tags were kept. Stone cracked and wood turned to ash as a tongue of flames shot upwards. Weapons close by melted away from the intense heat. The building was shattered by the explosion's force. Like cannon fire, debris, weapons, wood, and compressed air burst forth. The soldiers and ninja were ripped apart by the shrapnel. Heads and limbs were severed from the body, and flesh was torn asunder, causing blood to rise in enormous clouds and spill like floodwater. The floor was covered in bones and organs. The smell was awful, like burning flesh and blood. Numerous people were hurt, and nearby buildings, all of which had military significance, were damaged. There had just been a declaration of war. Holy shit, murmured Shoji. Yes, let's head out while everyone is preoccupied, Ulquiorra said as they followed him into the woods. They advanced quickly, skirting the patrol routes and getting closer and closer to the Mizu no Kuni border as they got farther and deeper into the trees. They were still a few days away as dawn came. Ulquiorra held up his palm. We'll stop here for a while. Konoha will be distracted for some time still. We can afford a short break. Kurenai steered Hinata away as they took a moment to gather their strength. Hinata. San, what is going on between you and Ulquiorra? She asked. Kurenai. Sensei, could you please calm down? Hinata grinned back. I can explain. I know Hiyashi set you up to marry him, but why did you agree? Ulquiorra broke into the conversation, seemingly listening in. I can explain that. He looked up at the Jonin. However, I must ask why you abandoned your village. Asuma was first to speak. My father was the Sandaime Hokage. He never would have allowed this sort of thing to happen. You don't know how many people have been executed over the last few years, all in the name of the village. My family have helped defend the place for years. But, personally, he exhaled. I never really liked the place. I always wanted a little more adventure. I never liked the Will of Fire. That place turned from a place I never liked to a place I hate. The others gave a nod. Anko raised his voice. I am an interrogator. You wouldn't believe how many people have been interrogated. Merchants, ninja, peasants. Everyone. They're tortured and mutilated. Back when I first became a shinobi of Konoha, you were expected to fight and die for the village. Now, you fight for your own gain. War crimes are more common than fucking jutsu nowadays. Guy flinched. It is no longer a place of honor and justice. So, we want out. Ulquiorra gave a nod. You are aware I intend to utterly destroy Konoha and Hano no Taikoku? Yes. I see. May we ask why? Ulquiorra lifted his shirt and revealed his hollow hole, saying, of course, Mitarashi. I was killed by a Konoha nin 3 years ago. With the exception of Yurei and Hinata, everyone recoiled in shock. Asuma muttered, bloody hell. How are you still alive? After my second death, in an alternate dimension, I was sent back with my soul made into a physical body so I could have revenge. Ha ha. So how are you alive? Ulquiorra kept glaring at them. He crushed and tore out an eye. That explanation enough? The sound of the explosion startled Tsunade. She leapt off her bed, her gaze darting to the window. One of the armories could be seen burning off in the distance, a brilliant red blaze that danced in the pitch. Black night. She hurriedly threw on a kimono over her yukata as she ran outside. Danzo strolled over and her bodyguards gathered around her. Trouble, Hokage. Sama? She had the option to slap him. Danzo, what the fuck is going on? There is a fire in the armory near the central district. It's not spreading, so there is no fear of the fire getting worse. Shizune approached her before she had a chance to reply. Tsunade. Sama. What Shizune? Someone's broken into Ulquiorra's office. Only he and I have a key to the room. Everything's been destroyed or stolen. The last nail in the coffin came next. Hokage. Sama. Yes, Kakashi, there has been a great disaster somewhere in Konoha. The Cifer mansion has been destroyed. Danzo gave the Hokage a scowl. Shall I deal with that? She gave a nod. Her color was a vivid maroon. Danzo surveyed the demolished mansion. Evidently, someone had left a potent explosive on a timer here. Based on the destruction, it was most likely the Tenten girl's creation. She was proficient with every type of weapon. As his root comrades searched through the debris for survivors, he turned to glance over his shoulder. He waved to Neji and gave Sai a nod. He addressed the 2 elite root members, who bowed and kneeled before him. Go to Tsunade. Give her this, he said, passing a letter to them. Everything regarding Ulquiorra and his group's escape was contained in it. He would be beginning the search, while she raged at his knowledge and at the chaos Ulquiorra had no doubt sown in his wake. All he could do was pray he caught him before he reached Suna. He held back. To what location would the boy go? Danzo would go to Kiri if he was going to Suna. Danzo would go to Suna if he was going to Kiri. In retrospect, it didn't really matter if he caught him or not. Konoha would control Cifer if he managed to get hold of Hinata. At least they would know where the boy and his group went if he ended up somewhere else. They could call them traitors, demand their return, or start a war. Everything was going quite nicely. Son of a bitch. Blasted son of a whore. Bastard. Kakashi looked from Tsunade to the Danzo letter. Ah. Ha, bad news I guess? Ulquiorra intends to kill us all. Pardon? Yesterday, Danzo discovered that Ulquiorra was planning to destroy us. He was planning on keeping it secret until he could find a way to contain Cifer. And? She gave him a floor slap. Ulquiorra set off the fires and burnt down the bloody armory. The comment was mumbled, making it sound like, ad fe hokomyths? And the documents? He stole them. Sai said, in actuality, the evidence points to a few councilmen. And WHO other than me had a fucking key? Then insight became apparent. This was aimed towards Shizune and said, what was missing from his offices? Nearly everything. We can't get a full inventory because we can't tell what was destroyed. It's just ashes left. You can close your mouths. You are not goldfish. There was a click and 5 mouths closed. Anko was sick. She had been making love to a boy who had died so young and unhappy and who had come back out of pure love. Asuma was uncomfortable, too. His father had showered his love on this boy. There once had been great promise in this boy. Kurenai was now feeling uneasy for similar reasons as her husband, and she was also worried about him and Hinata. Although she was aware that he had eventually confessed his love to her, she had never considered it to be the boy's only source of happiness. Guy, meanwhile, was furious. The bad guy wasn't Naruto, but Kakashi. He made a silent vow to himself that he would personally punish Kakashi by bringing him to Ulquiorra. After glancing between Ulquiorra and Hinata, Hanabi whispered to her sister, "Is that him?" "Yes, Hanabi." "Chan." Hanabi gave a nod. Ulquiorra, changing his clothes, gave her a quick glance. "Now, I suppose you can make an educated guess as to why I intend to kill every living person in Konoha." "That disturbs you, Ino?" With a quick glance between each person's uncomfortable expressions, Ino turned back to Ulquiorra. "Naruto." "Ulquiorra, sorry, you can't mean to kill everyone, can you?" "Why not? They hounded me, tortured me, took everything from me. Hope, love, friends, life. Why should I spare so much as a single person? They are all guilty, Ino, save for a few, and only the few shall live." The implications caused Ino's eyes, along with almost everyone else's, to widen. He was going to kill everyone who had hurt him. Their kin would perish. Every child, woman, and man would perish. Konoha was about to experience hell sent by Ulquiorra. With a, "Ulquiorra San," Ino began. She began, "I need no title, Ino. Chan. You all fear for your families. I will leave extend mercy to them." "Why? How wonderful, Kiba, you fool. He extends mercy, and you choose to ignore it." His emerald eyes stared into theirs as he said, "Because I am curious, if nothing else. I wish to discover if I am capable of compassion." He picked up his scrolls again and looked away. "And, I would be lying if I did not admit that I would not wish to harm those who I once called friends." A awkward silence fell. "And what do you call us now, Ulquiorra? Kun?" "Now, Tenten, it has been 3,000 years since I have used the term friend in any positive light. Until I do so, you are comrades. And you should leave." He turned, drawing his shining sword. "Welcome, Akatsuki. Previously, at some point. Deidara. Senpei, you sure this is a good idea? Leader. Sama sent us to keep an eye on the boy while the zombie combo deals with the Nibi. We aren't gonna kill him. Toby gestured toward his side. Then why all the extra clay, senpai? Because we may need to keep him off. He notices us. I don't know if he knows anything about art, senpai. Particularly of your quality. Stop buttering me up. You still owe me 40 ryo. I ain't calling it off. Sorry. Deidara snarled. It was a good agent, Toby. Though incredibly awkward, his time. Space ninjutsu enabled them to maneuver around the adversary. No artistic taste. True ripoff, indeed. What a bastard. He was nevertheless every bit as pleasant to work with as Sasori. Despite their disagreements regarding art, he had genuine admiration for the puppeteer. In a toast to the former Suna Nin, he had lifted his fair share of the glasses. And it was fun, Toby. In a way that makes you think, my god, he is a drunken fool. Except for when he was being quiet and courteous, I couldn't stand him. Or the infrequent times when they cracked jokes at one another. Armies of explosives and time. Space ninjutsu had proven to be an extremely bizarre combination. Right now, the pair was situated slightly to the south of Konoha, enjoying raucous banter under a tree's branches. Toby was midway through a rather nasty one about a girl he'd known back home that had made Deidara laugh so hard his right arm's stitches felt like they might burst. And then, she says, no, mother, you gotta suck it like this. Deidara laughed. By the kami, Toby, how the hell did you get out of that one? I convinced her mother to do it. There, Deidara lost it. Well, bawahahaha, he had to pause in order to let the laughter stop. Well, that puts paid to my story about me and the daimyo's granddaughter. Toby chuckled in response. Well, of course I win. Deidara said, so much for being a good boy, and got to his feet. Toby chuckled and trailed behind him. After walking for almost 60 minutes, Ulquiorra and his group were discovered. They had done their best to hide and had listened as Ulquiorra told the group about his intentions to murder Konoha as payback for his death. Toby said, looks good for a corpse. And you should leave. Ulquiorra spun around, drawing his shining sword. Welcome, Akatsuki. Deidara began, and then he and Toby moved outside and stood in front of them as though they were being pulled by an unseen force. The boy leveled his sword at Ulquiorra and his pale blue gray eyes met Ulquiorra's. Deidara, correct? Yes, how did you know? Your name was mentioned during the briefing for the rescue of Gaara. I see you reattached your limb. Deidara tensed up and massaged his mended arm. It stung even now. Deidara glared at Toby. Hey, senpai, but the idiot disregarded her. If he hates Konoha, why don't we offer membership? Ulquiorra arched his brow. You recall my words to your leader? My goal is to destroy Konoha and Akatsuki. You are both my enemy. Everyone, leave. This is liable to escalate. Deidara reached into his clay pouches out of instinct. Toby burst out laughing and started hopping around. Ulquiorra's group cast a quick glance at each other and the Akatsuki. They said, Ulquiorra, we aren't gonna run. The Seru Toby. Ulquiorra sighed, glancing around the group. Then make yourselves useful. Ulquiorra lunged ahead, slamming his sword at Deidara in a broad arc. The man threw up his hands, barely avoiding the sword. Ulquiorra saw the mouths in his hands, but he was shocked when two snakes sprang out of them. He easily swerved to avoid them, but to his surprise, they burst apart. His face and clothes were ruined, and his hair was burned. He heard a collective gasp as his face, which had been burned to reveal some muscle, began to regenerate as blood flowed down it. I forgot. The Bakuden and your Kinjutsu. I never anticipated extra mouths, however. Deidara. Senpai, Toby said, gesturing to the Deidara with his hand behind his back. We are outnumbered, should I get the reinforcements? Fine. But leave Cifer, he is mine, Got it. Ulquiorra gave the command, someone kill the masked one. He felt different from the others, and he didn't want to deal with any more Akatsuki. Guy was first to jump at the command. Leaping up and sailing through the air, he ran forward, powering over the grass. Guy yelled, Dynamiku Entori. And then completely missed, striking a tree behind the mask. Wearing Akatsuki. Someone competent killed the masked one. Toby, the one wearing the mask, laughed loudly and pulled out a sizable sealing scroll. He flung it to the floor, allowing it to open as it fell. Toby yelled, "Kachiyose no Jutsu, Shiro Zetsu Bunshin," as his open hand brushed against the scroll. 31 figures appeared as the summoning smoke cleared. Their skin tone was slightly darker than Ulquiorra's, and they had an odd human-like appearance. They resembled Frankenstein monsters, with green hair and yellow eyes that appeared to be sewn together. Deidara ordered, "Zetsus, get the others. Toby, help me with the freak. I thought you wanted him to yourself? Shut up and help me. Sorry." While this was going on, Ulquiorra quickly spun around to watch as the odd clones ambushed his allies, splitting into pairs to combat them while one targeted Hanabi. He encountered Toby just as he was ready to assist them. The man said, "Hi," and then vanished in an odd spiral distortion. Deidara's flying explosive caught Ulquiorra off guard before he could even register his disappearance. He curled around and swung his sword to prevent Toby from grabbing a kunai. "It's quick, isn't it?" Toby asked. Ulquiorra's attack was barely deterring the man, even with his incredible strength. Both of them leapt back and swung their blades once more, but the outcome remained the same. Ulquiorra repeatedly struck with one hand while firing balls at Deidara's explosives with his other to keep them at bay. Meanwhile, the Zetsu clones were engaged in combat with Ulquiorra's allies. Tenten was summoning a group of Dao and using her skills to cut and slice at the clones' different points of death with a clinical ease. They were encircling her and attacking in turns, keeping her from getting too many hits or employing any stronger moves. Suigetsu was laughing maniacally as he hacked and slashed at his foes, smiling and sweeping his great sword in great arcs that sliced both left and right. The clones were kept on guard, though, as a result of the sword's enormous size, which allowed them to dodge the majority of the blows. Guy and Lee were fighting each other, but the clones' resilience and persistence appeared to be greater than their combined taijutsu. However, Shikamaru and Ino were going through the worst of it. They were depending on their taijutsu and other techniques because their clan's jutsu was slow and cumbersome. The clones were obviously superior, even though they were by no means weaklings in this area. Kurenai and Asuma were getting along great, with Asuma using his fire jutsu and knives to hold Kurenai off while the genjutsu mistress provided distraction. Regretfully, the clones had some kind of jutsu that made it possible for them to quickly burrow underground. Jugo and Choji had also banded together, their superhuman strength crushing their clones to mush. Jugo was still going gray, but he was trying not to get too worked up. Anko was trying to poison her opponents with her serpents and deter them with her snake jutsu. Using their paired jutsu, Kiba and Akamaru were able to easily defeat their clones, splitting them apart to prevent too much damage and then uniting them with Gatsuga. While the clones were being held off by Shino's Kakaichu, only one of them appeared to be fighting him, the other convulsing in an unusual way. This was because they did not appear to be using any jutsu. Karen was effortlessly dodging all of the attacks while using her newly acquired jutsu. Kaden. Bakuhatsu Muchiuchisho no Jutsu, Exploding Whiplash, was the name of the special jutsu that Karen learned to deal with difficult opponents. Through her training, she had shown an affinity for fire jutsu. It killed with one blow. Her hands were covered in fire, akin to the Chidori's lightning, after they broke through the seals. Her hands, though, trailed sparks and flames behind them as they moved. She tapped the closest person on the neck, swaying under the assault. Its neck was encircled by a flaming wheel that suddenly erupted into flames, beheading and destroying it. She concentrated on that, as she only had one to worry about. But Hinata was really amazing. She was dealing strong, incapacitating blows to the clones with her gentle fist. There's already one hanging at its side with a broken arm. The other had a shattered jaw. She wasn't just using her hands. She was also kicking and kneeling with great force while encircling her legs in chakra. She was unique among her peers. Another moment, and one was down and out, her special version of the gentle fist exploding its head. If she wasn't also assisting her sister, she would be even more deadly. Despite Hanabi's skill, the clone's strength and durability easily outmatched hers. It was hitting her hard on the ground even now. Ulquiorra kicked Toby, but when his foot passed right through him, he became alarmed. Nothing was present, not even blood or bone. The man had dissolved into nothingness. Toby took off from the limb and used a kunai to stab him in the eye. It hurt like made even though the blade couldn't have pierced his skull and impaled his brain because of his hardened bone structure. Even worse, a tag containing explosives was affixed. Ulquiorra was covered in fire and smoke after a loud explosion. "Ulquiorra!" exclaimed Hinata. "Please, Ryo. Sama, please don't let him be dead." She bobbed beneath the next blow and tore open the second clone's chest with her signature Hokudo Shinken strike. She cried, "Shugohaki Rokuhuyan Sho," as she chopped up the clone that was pursuing her sister. Confident that she was safe, she turned and sprinted in Ulquiorra's direction. Coughing, Ulquiorra came out of the cloud. Based on the intense pain and dizziness, he had likely suffered brain damage. He was accurate. Most of his bones were visible due to the extreme burning on the right side of his face. A portion of his neck had been peeled away, and his hair had also been destroyed. As his body healed, he assessed the circumstances. At this point, his allies had largely dealt with the clones. It had become apparent to Asuma and Kurenai that the clones' burrowing method was flawed. After using a variety of explosives to clear the area around them, the clones were distracted by the absence of cover and took out their targets with a few well-placed blows. Kiba and Akamaru tore them apart with a Gatsuga Kunai combo as they concluded theirs. The clones were diverted by Shikamaru, allowing Ino to use her skills on them and give the order to end their lives. Shino, in the meantime, had noticed that the person who was ignoring him was actually dividing into two clones. He had utilized the insect's potent poison to kill the one attacking him by using its one weak point, its eyes, while using his Kakaichu to thwart the jutsu. The melee experts had prevailed by simply beating them to death. Right now Jugo was dribbling clone blood from his lips. After completing hers, Karen was quickly tending to her allies. Finally, Suigetsu had liquefied, suffocating the clones inside the water prison and beheading them before releasing the bodies. After finally driving her Dao into the clones' skulls, Tenten took out a set of explosives and set them on fire. Ulquiorra sensed a pair of gentle hands clasp him. He turned to see Hinata, who was staring up at him with worry and fear. He felt incredibly moved. He reached down and gently took her hands with his left, then released them and turned to face the surviving Akatsuki. "Calm down, Hinata. Chan. I am fine." They both appeared scared and worried. "C2, Senpai?" "C2, verified Deidara." He reached into his pouches and pulled out a handful of clay. "Go now," Ulquiorra ordered, "Sonito." Ing the two Akatsuki before grabbing them and setting off. They disappeared so quickly that Hinata's Byakugan was unable to keep up with them. She pursed her lips and watched the others as they recovered. Hanabi, a little bloody from her fight, rushed over. Hinata gave her sister a hug. "Hanabi, are you okay?" "Yes, Hinata." "Chan." The young child hugged her back in response. Hinata leaned back and gave her a close inspection. "Hanabi, stay with the others, okay? I've got to go to Ulquiorra." Suigetsu stood up and remarked, "And you're mad if you think we're gonna let you do that." Ulquiorra said we had to go, and we've gotta protect you. "Those guys are deadly. We won't stand a chance." "I think I will." "Please, Suigetsu. I've got to go." Jugo interrupted Suigetsu just as she was ready to argue. "She's not going to come willingly. I say we go after Ulquiorra." "And get beheaded for disobedience?" "No thanks. You can always say that I forced you to follow me." Everybody turned to face one another. Although they were confident Ulquiorra could take care of himself, they were actually concerned for him. He served as both their friend and leader. They were not going to let him down like they had previously, under any circumstances. Suigetsu said, "Fine," raising his hands in surrender. "I suppose I can liquefy. He can't behead me if I'm water." Karen answered, "No, but he can evaporate you." Ulquiorra stopped in a wide open space in the middle of the forest, almost 10 miles away. He halted and flung up massive clouds of dust, then tossed the two Akatsuki aside. Toby recovered with a teleportation jutsu, but Deidara hit the hard ground with a loud crack. With a moan of agony, he exclaimed, "The hell was that?" "Sonito. A technique that allows me to move at a speed that exceeds any technique on this earth. Save for your teleportation, just you, Toby." Toby lifted his kunai to block Murcielago, laughing at the compliment. Ulquiorra and Toby started to hack and slash at each other, and there was the sound of steel screaming. Each time Ulquiorra was about to hit him, the man would become undefinable, and each time Toby hit Ulquiorra, his hierro prevented the damage from being too severe. Ulquiorra released his hold and leapt away as his sword sliced through the top portion of Toba's skull. The sound of something flying toward him caused him to turn. He could see dozens of tiny birds made of exploding clay flying toward him. Using Sonido, he evaded them, but Deidara started to make more, launching a flurry of aerial bombs at him as a small swarm of insect and mammal sculptures raced toward him on the ground. Leaping into the air, he soared above the scrambling mass and detonated a group of ballas into the ground, causing them to explode safely beneath him. He didn't fall, he just kept flying and shredded the explosives. But it wasn't until Toby was in front of him, throwing a sizable explosive at his arm before teleporting away again, that he realized Toby had vanished once more. Deidara set it off, severing Ulquiorra's hand at the wrist, but not before he was able to Sonido away from the clay. He landed far away and observed the Akatsuki closely. Murcielago buried himself in a tree a short distance away, his hand still grasping it. While his hand healed, he thought about the Akatsuki. That's their strategy, then. Toby is going to bring explosives to me so Deidara can light them using his intangibility and teleportation powers. I can't outrun him or the detonation because he moves in Sonido at least as quickly as I do, and Deidara always has them ready. It would take too long to separate them, and Toby could easily regroup. Toba's meddling gives Deidara enough cover to make his bombs, and even if I killed one of them, the other would have plenty of time to plan something just as unpleasant for me. He made the decision not to grab his sword. This was hardly a situation where the katana was useful. If he doesn't finish the damn thing. Sero, realizing his error, leapt into the air. Still, Toby stayed on the ground, standing next to Deidara. It was clear that the demolition shinobi had intentions. Ulquiorra fired a Sero from far above them. The green beam descended to Earth with amazing speed. Pale smoke spiraled upwards as a massive cloud of dust and debris shot skyward as it struck. After landing in the air clearing, Ulquiorra searched for the bodies while recalling Sasori's extraordinary survival abilities. Toby had clearly gotten away. Had he been intangible, he would still be alive. The only thing to wonder was if Deidara had also been saved by his teleportation. He let out a soft, blah, from behind him and spun, kicking out his leg so quickly that even Toby was unable to dodge in time. In spite of this, he teleported to avoid receiving any more injuries from what would have been a harsh landing, even though the kick had clearly caused him significant pain. Ulquiorra remarked, "The Akatsuki are amazing escape artists," as Deidara was wrapping up his setup. As a massive clay dragon emerged from a cloud of smoke and spat from Deidara's joined hands, Toby exclaimed, "Tada!" Presenting one of my partner's signature pieces, his specialty, the C2 dragon. With love and pride. Ulquiorra's eyes got smaller. He was unable to depend on air superiority anymore, assuming that beast was able to fly at all. Deidara smiled and jumped up on its back. "Toby, keep him down here, hum." The loudly happy man said, "Right." "Oh, Deidara. Senpai," before disappearing beneath the dragon. He now had to deal with both an aerial and an underground attack. Fantastic. And now the dragon was dropping landmines, underground burrowing all around him. "It looks like I'm winning this." "Deidara, that was a mistake," he called. Deidara cocked an eyebrow, adjusting his scope in his hand. "I failed to see how." "Enlighten me, hum." "You have just buried your partner underneath your landmines." "I can avoid all them." "Can he?" With a start, Deidara looked at the floor. "Toby, run." With Ulquiorra Sony doing all over the place, landmines were being set off in a great confusion. When the flames finally subsided, Ulquiorra found himself facing a perfectly healthy Toby. "Nice idea," the man remarked. "All right, for about 2.5 minutes, there were explosions. Therefore, there's a good chance that this is a more intangible time." He looked up and saw the dragon start to convulse. Or he teleported away, but that does create the spiral distortion I had my eye open for. Ulquiorra shot upward, away from the dragon, realizing it was about to launch something again. He had more time to fire at the sculptures the farther he positioned himself away from the beast. "So, you're scared of my art, huh?" Deidara laughed in jest. The dragon exclaimed, "Well, I have a few more masterpieces coming your way," and started shooting smaller versions of himself into the air. Ulquiorra swerved around the flying projectiles, wondering if they too could fire more clay explosives. Apparently not, even though he appeared to be dodging more explosions, they were guided missiles. Deidara, Akatsuki found a great member in you. As Toby touched down on the dragon, it appeared that a deadlock had been reached. Thanks. Toby had the ability to become invisible and teleport both himself and Deidara away from the majority of attacks. Ulquiorra, on the other hand, was too swift for the majority of the explosives, and his regeneration in Hierro took care of the remainder. A mutual agreement was reached at this point. Both provided the necessary breathing room to the opposing side. The dragon's tail has gotten shorter. I understand. To create the dragon's bombs, he has to extract clay from the creature itself. Therefore, if I can remove the tail, he will need to sacrifice other dragon parts, use more clay to rebuild the dragon, or make his regular bombs from atop the beast in order to keep his hold on the air. With a fresh strategy in mind, Ulquiorra sonidoed to the ground next to his sword as Toby was handed a new bomb. After severing his finger on the edge of Murcielago, he sonidoed once more, this time aiming his severed digit at the dragon's tail. Gran Rey Cero. A white buzz saw of energy shot upward too quickly for the shinobi to react, instantly reminding him of a shuriken. The tail was cut cleanly, with a soft hiss, and fell to the ground with a crash. The dragon stumbled, suddenly unsteady. "Damn it!" exclaimed Deidara. "Clever little shit." Deidara. Senpai. What? It's, coming back." Deidara turned just in time to see the returning Gran Rey Cero split his dragon in half. Ulquiorra had proficiency with that method from the beginning. Ulquiorra moved forward once more, grabbing his sword and glaring at them as the dragon halves crashed into the ground, causing it to tremble, while Toby teleported the two of them safely to the ground. Pointing his Murcielago at them, he said, "C2. Your little bombs are C1, correct? Do you intend to unveil C3? Or C4? Ulquiorra realized afterwards that, in retrospect, he had probably said the wrong thing when he said, "Give it up, Akatsuki. Your art is far beneath my abilities. Beneath your notice. Beneath your notice." Deidara. Senpai, Toby reassured him, trying to calm him down. "Beneath your notice. Do not mock my art." Ulquiorra scowled as Deidara pushed his partner out of the way and pressed explosive clay against his lips. Sensing that something was amiss, Ulquiorra lifted his sword and held up his hand for a Cero. Those eyes. Those damn eyes. Judging me. Judging my art. You and Itachi. One and the same. Ulquiorra's pupils shrank once more. Itachi. Itachi belonged to Akatsuki. That was something, though, that he had overlooked. He had better remember it this time. He began just as Deidara started to throw up clay. There was a problem with it. His eyes were exceptionally sharp, considering that he had not used his sense of sight for almost 3 millennia. He was able to see even the smallest details. In the Shinigami realm, anyway. His eyes could see the traces of Ryotsu there. Even though the Sharingan and Byakugan were more skilled observers than he was, they were still able to see details more clearly than most. The clay was growing and expanding quickly as it was shaped into a duplicate of Deidara. "Toby, get us out of here." "Right." Ulquiorra took note of the direction in which they ran prior to teleporting, and then he looked back at the model. It dawned on him, and his eyes grew wide. He pivoted and started to sprint. When they were out of sight, Deidara pulled Toby to a stop and peered over his shoulder at Ulquiorra and the C4. He smiled at Ulquiorra's turn and backward glance as the bomb had no effect. Ulquiorra appeared perplexed. Realizing it was a bust, he pivoted and raced in their direction. The scope on Deidara narrowed and revealed his widening nostrils. He exclaimed, "Yes!" and set off the C4. The sculpture vanished even as Ulquiorra appeared. His sonido cracked, but he was nowhere to be seen. Deidara smiled as the animals started to die. His work had triumphed. Toby was on the ground with his fist in his stomach. A foot slammed into Deidara, knocking him off balance. Ulquiorra was flying next to Deidara as he was flung aside, and then he was disarmed once more. He coughed up blood and wheezed as he fell hard against a tree. He looked up to see Ulquiorra moving forward. His clothes were burned away, leaving only his shoes and trousers, and his face severely disintegrated, exposing the hole. The edges were also burnt. And he had lost his left arm. "How did you survive?" "I'm sorry," Deidara began. Based on his tone, Deidara assumed that this was the highest compliment he would get. "Your art is rather impressive." "I survived because of 3 things. 1. I only took a small breath before holding it, to see if what I feared was correct. If you had waited longer, your C4 would have dissolved me utterly. As it was, there was only a small amount of bombs within me. 2nd, he sheathed his weapon and looked down as his body began to regenerate. With his body fully restored, he looked over his shoulder at Toby. I can control my bodily functions to some extent. I was able to use my own unique energy to force the bombs away from major organs. Impressive. You programmed them to aim for key points of the body." He took another step, stopped, mumbled something, and fell to his knees. 3rd, I saw you run. If it had been a normal bomb, you wouldn't have run. But, because you did, I realized the danger. I forced more of my energy into my hierro and regeneration, so that no matter what, I was ready. He coughed up blood and lifted his hand to rest it on his left shoulder. His body's stress finally caught up with him, and he fixed his gaze on the problematic muscle. With a sigh, Deidara unwinds. "You can delay some?" Deidara remained silent and smiled ferociously. He sat up and lifted his other hand to strike the last blow when Ulquiorra. A girl materialized and Deidara cast a sidelong glance. He had just enough time to identify the Byakugan before being knocked away by a fist covered in chakra to the head. He was in a daze as he observed the Hyuga kneeling next to Ulquiorra and sweeping her gaze over him. "What's wrong, Ulquiorra? Kun? It sounds like she's in love with him." The Hyuga tensed up in fear, saying, "Left shoulder, bombs inside. Watch his hand. Remote detonation." She tapped her fingers quickly across his shoulder for a moment, her mouth a hard, grim line. She's neutralizing the explosives, Deidara realized. With a growl, he started to undo his last mouth move covertly while the Hyuga girl was finishing. Deidara began as soon as he realized who the girl was. "Thank you, Hinata. Chan. Well, it ultimately elevates my art to a higher level." Silently Ulquiorra touched the girl's brow, causing her to flush and supporting him as he stood up. With a wider smile, he heard Ulquiorra's group approaching. Ulquiorra rounded on him, observing out of the corner of his eye. With a shrug, Deidara showed off his own torso deformity and fed it a big chunk of clay. Ulquiorra's gaze grew wide. He'd said his art was impressive after all, 10 kilometers. "Toby, get out of here." The sound of the time. Space jutsu activating appeared. Deidara smiled. "I'll see you in the afterlife, Ulquiorra. Because my art is an explosion." Ulquiorra was aware of his limits. He acknowledged them and responded to them. Aside from circumstances such as these ones. With a sonito, he grabbed Hinata and the others and proceeded to move swiftly. He increased his speed steadily after gathering them all. His body was soon collapsing from the strain. He overcame his sonito barrier and continued. They were just far enough, roughly 11 kilometers, from the Akatsuki in a matter of heartbeats. Whoa! The massive explosion shot skyward, resembling a gleaming statue of an ancient deity. It vanished again in a matter of moments, leaving the sky darker in its absence. Ulquiorra mumbled, "Art is an explosion, indeed," and then he fell forward into the darkness. He was an absolute mess. Karen declared his arms crippled, his legs broken, and almost all of his ribs broken. His organs were under a lot of stress, but they were mostly intact. His kidneys were almost completely gone, but everything should be resolved by his regeneration. It still appeared as though a giant had snatched him up and consumed him. Sitting at his side and holding his hand, Hinata was distraught. They were in a cave that lay just beyond the border of Mizu no Kuni. Asuma had stated that they had to continue. Ulquiorra would be helpless now that Konoha would be aware of the explosion. They had to get away. Ulquiorra's hair fell back from her brow, which Hinata stroked. She let out a sigh. Despite his strength, he had a fragility. Before taking up her vigil here, she had a talk with the others. It had been noted by all that Ulquiorra had explained his past solely through his eyes. That suggested even more about his state of mind. He showed his past in a rather brutal way, which suggested that he could only think in clinical terms, even though it was obviously the simplest approach. There was no way they could talk him out of it. Considering that 3 millennia had passed, it would never function. It was the way he was. Still, it seemed wise to let him know a little more about what was going on. Even though it was only with Hinata. It appeared that he could only demonstrate absolutes and didn't think anyone would believe him. He was not trusting. Hinata found this particularly unsettling because he had done the same for her. He could have told a story about their time together, for sure. For example, their admission. I swear, Ulquiorra, that I will do everything in my power to improve our life together. Awake. Up call in A. Bath? Ryo. Sama. Yep. The type of room he was in had changed. He stood in an open crater of rock at the very top of a mountain, under a nebulous sky full of stars in the midnight black that seemed to be 1,000 different colors. The crater had a diameter of almost 20 feet, contained transparent water, and had a slight pink hue. Other than a small towel around his waist, he was naked. Ryo. Sama was seated across from him. He had a woman on each side of him and was dressed similarly in towels. One had eyes like starlight and the color of darkness. She was hauntingly beautiful. The other had demonic teeth that resembled needles and was the color of light. Evil was the brightness, and good was the darkness. Ulquiorra, meet the wives. Good and evil. Ulquiorra bent forward. I am honored, Ryo. Sama. With a smile on his face, he sent Ulquiorra a little tray containing a small sakazuki and a bottle of sake. Pouring himself a drink slowly, Ulquiorra took a sip. He appeared to have drank life itself. Tasty, Ulquiorra? Yes, Ryo. Sama. May I ask if I am dead? This from evil. No. Just recovering. He took another sip and said, I see. Should I anticipate return visits? Only if you fuck up. Ulquiorra scowled. Ulquiorra, you're doing great. Better than I hoped actually. Half expected you to straight up kill Konoha actually and leave everything else alone. Ray. Sama touched his beard. No, it's just well, you're not at your full power yet. At least not what I hope you'll get. Ulquiorra was listening carefully, but he became aware of a hand on his shoulder. May I ask where we are? Inquired Hinata. When Ulquiorra saw her in a yellow bikini that was too small, he had to bite his tongue. Hinata gasped and hurriedly apologized to Ryo. Sama, who grinned amiably. We are in. Ryo. Sama's bath. Don't worry, I brought you here. You're important too, Hinata. Chan. Listen, Ulquiorra, you will understand in time, but I want to offer you something. Ulquiorra leaned on Hinata and placed her other hand on his shoulder, saying, What, Ryo? Sama? With care. Well, you have your limits. Now, I can't bring you back to life again. Different dimensional rules and all that. But, if needed, I can bring you here to recover from certain endeavors. Good raised his voice. In future try not to needlessly hurt yourself like that. It harms more than yourself. Ulquiorra gave a nod. I understand. Why is Hinata? Chan here though? The Spirit King exclaimed, Oh, aren't they precious? With delight. Hinata. Chan. Oh, you too are precious. Roll with it, said Good and Evil. Well, as I said, if all goes well, I have a plan or two for you. Never could stand the idea of destiny. Why can't people live the lives they want? Makes it easier to reward and punish too. I gave prophecies instead. Marvelous things. Like mints. Only come true if needed. So there is a prophecy about me? Oh yes, Kun. Ryo smiled at the twitch that was an involuntary, grudging twitch. A very big one. Kinda need you alive for it. It is, rather important for the future too, not just the present. Which is why Hinata is here. She will be the mother of your children. Unless you suddenly go infertile. I'll bring you here if that happens. Anyway, I think you've recovered enough. I'll send you back in a moment. Ryo. Sama, Hinata stumbled to speak. Thank you. 4. With a smile, Ryo gestured to them. He made some very suggestive gestures, and as they disappeared, they saw evil and good screaming at him. Don't worry. Happy to help. Oh, and by the way, you've got good taste, Ulquiorra. He exclaimed. In the cave, they sighed as they awoke. Ulquiorra was back to full health, and the two continued to hold hands. Ulquiorra. Kun, W. We just saw each other nearly naked. Hinata. Chan, we just had a bath with the god of gods, and that's your first comment? She timidly kissed his cheek, flushed. Ulquiorra whispered, we are engaged. You have the right to kiss my lips if you. And Hinata did just that. In private, he was getting a little sick of having to hide the one feeling he had other than apathy and rage. They were reunited. Nothing could ever keep them apart. However, why won't you kiss me first? I'm afraid. The voice was very quiet. Why? She asked, understanding as she met his eyes. Just because you've got a different name and face doesn't mean I don't love you. You're still the same person. You still care. You've loved me for 3,000 years. You're still who you once were. And I'm never leaving. We belong together no matter what. He took his time embracing her and holding her close. Ryo. Sama never explained much, did he? No. But what can mortals expect of deities? Nothing he will ever say to us will be easy. No. He's a little crazy. Yes. Not as bad as Lee and Guy though. I think it's a tie. Boredom is overwhelming me right now. It was Ryo. Sama that bored him. Here, there was nothing to do. He had been stuck here for so long that he could feel his way forward just by feeling the ground beneath his feet. He was becoming bored. Scratch that. Bored isn't even close to summarizing my feelings. Not even the guards can help. Heck, even a round of shogi or riddles. Nothing. In relation to the guards. Led by Gamabunta and his sons, the group of 20 toads, fully armed, stood outside, taking in the breathtaking view of Mount Myoboku. Gamakichi, a younger toad, was approaching him with a bowl of sake in his arms, either by walking or hopping. What, no food? I have my limits. Natural energy is rather tasteless. Calm down. We've got some snake meat on the way. And some deer. He started drinking, holding the saucer in his hands, saying, about time. How much longer do I have to wait? How the bloody hell should I know? I don't even know where he is. The toad took the hint and walked away when he growled at it. He licked his lips, swishing the sake around his mouth in gratitude. He would give the one thing to the toad. They produced quality alcoholic beverages. How are you today? He asked with a frustrated sigh. Glancing up from his beverage, he observed the Ogama Sennin seated within an exposed Normono, propelled by a pair of robust toads. How do you think? Bored? Yes. The toad exclaimed, stroking his chin in relief as the man bellowed in annoyance. I'm sorry, but have you grown? A deep growl reverberated throughout the cave, and a pair of eyes started to tick violently. Yes. Remain cool, stay cool. Well, I have some good news for you. He gave his ears a prickle. Jiraiya is here. He took a seat. Has he found? No, I haven't. Jiraiya said, standing erect and fearless while the enormous toad and the cave's occupant peered down at him. However, I am prepared to begin my search, he said, raising his gaze to the enormous crimson eyes. Who are you and who is the boy in question? With a grin, the enormous creature emerged from the shadows, leaving Jiraiya motionless and filled with terror. The boy is my destined Jinchuriki. Listen to me, Arrow. Sennin. That boy and I are meant to be together. I am his destiny. He is mine. Find him. He will know what is needed. With a sneer, Kurama covered the former Konoha. Nin with a large claw. Tell him, if he wants his tails, he knows where to find me, he said, feeling the man's fear radiating from him. The following morning, Ulquiorra woke up with Hinata still in his arms. They were lying there with a blanket draped over them by someone. Hinata snorted softly, quietly, with a sound that resembled the chattering of a small animal. A squirrel, perhaps. Upon scanning the cave, he noticed that nobody was observing him, either dozing off or keeping guard. Karen was tinkering with something big using a scalpel. Assuming that no one was observing him, he softly kissed Hinata. It was a brief, chaste kiss that was loving but not overly passionate. Hinata whispered, "Morning, you." Ulquiorra. "Kun," and then abruptly opened her eyes. He felt a little awkward, so he broke off the kiss and leaned back. She gave him a cheek kiss while grinning. She turned to look at herself and blushed. "So, are we going to tell them what happened with Ryo?" "Sama? I can show them." "No." His eyebrows quirked. With a sigh, she touched his hair. "You, Ulquiorra." "Kun, why? You seem not to trust us. You rely on evidence like that all the time. UN. Never tell us what it is like. You're closed, even to me." Ulquiorra said nothing, his gaze fixed on the pit in her throat. I know that for you it has been 3,000 years. Why? You're never going to really change. I don't care. But please, T. Trust us more. Please. She gave him a second kiss. In response, he muttered, "I cannot promise it, but I shall try. That's all I ask." Hinata began, and Ulquiorra, smiling like the cat with the canary, loomed over them, giving Anko a withering glare. "Aren't you too sweet? I could just eat you up." Ryo. Sama said much the same thing. She held back. You saw him again?" "Yes." Anko clenched her teeth, moistened her lips, cleared her throat, and then said, "Okay, breakfast is almost ready." Guys, turning to face the others. Ulquiorra saw Ryo. Sama again. The sound of numerous, varied objects hitting the floor could be heard. "Yes, we had a bath with him." "Okay." The breakfast table was a boisterous place. Everyone was calling for an exhaustive account of what had transpired. Ulquiorra had reached for his eyes out of instinct, but Hinata's glance dissuaded him and he allowed her to continue. Ryo's peculiarity surprised everyone, though it wasn't all that shocking given Ulquiorra's memories. With the meal, Suigetsu had excelled even himself. He had prepared a splendid dish of dangos and rice with grilled mackerel, even though he didn't have a complete stock of utensils and similar items. Naturally, Shoji received the most so that he would always be prepared to use his jutsu. Ulquiorra asked Karen, "What were you working on earlier?" And gave Hinata another helping, rewarding her with a kiss. "Oh, a dead body. I see. One of the Zetsus," the woman clarified. "We took what bodies we could and brought them here." "How? I thought you said that sealing scrolls didn't have the ability to contain dead bodies." "Yeah. So how did you bring them?" "There is a workaround. A summoning scroll crossed with a containment seal." Ulquiorra nodded, wondering what she might have discovered. "Found anything of interest?" "Not really. I don't have a lab here, so I can't really do all that much." Interesting physiology though. No lungs and no digestive system. The heart is a bit denser. I think their durability comes from their heavy muscle mass and the bones don't really exist. All eyes turned to examine the body. Shikamaru questioned, "An artificial creation?" "Obviously. Probably of Orochimaru's doing. No one else has the skill. At least to the best of your knowledge," Ino said. Karen gave a nod. Ulquiorra gave a headshake. "I doubt that Orochimaru would have created anything for the Akatsuki without something of equal significance given in return. Nothing suggests such." Asuma gave a nod. "It makes sense," he said, lighting a cigarette and dodging his wife's stern glance. Ulquiorra gave a nod and paused. He looked over his memories of Orochimaru again, silently. He saw only a few shattered pictures of needles and a severed hand with a ring on it, not much else to go on from them. He turned to face them and looked at Anko. From the memories I gained, he seemed to have lost a hand. It had a ring on the little finger, left hand. Anko paused to think, then winced. He was a member of the Akatsuki for a time. He tried to take over Itachi's body and failed, forcing him to defect. Ulquiorra scowled and closed his eyes. So, Tenten said. We can make the guess that the Akatsuki has access to some of his knowledge then. Yes. It would be prudent to do so. Fuck, Suigetsu quieted himself. I concur, said Guy. Fuck. With a worried look in her younger sister's direction, Hinata pleaded, please don't swear in front of Hanabi. After tidying the cave and placing the bodies inside the containment scroll, they completed packing their bags and prepared to leave. Ulquiorra. San, we know we're going to Kiri, but what exactly are we going to do there? It is a good hiding place for the moment. Yes, but Konoha has their economy in their pocket. How are we going to remain hidden there? I will explain when we arrive. I have a plan. Ulquiorra, are you sure you're fit to travel? I know Ryo. Sama healed you, but you were half dead. I am fully recovered, thank you Kiba. Let us go. They were just outside Kiri's walls as the afternoon turned into twilight, about 4 days later. Ulquiorra motioned for them to assemble in front of him. Through the heavy fog, they emerged at the massive gates, manned by a minimum of 12 shinobi who were fully outfitted in Anbu uniforms and carrying swords. They prepared their weapons and fell into combative stances, but halted upon seeing Ulquiorra. The guard captain stepped forward, casting glances between the group and its leader. With his mask covering his face, he spoke, Cifer. Sama, welcome back to Kirigakure no Sato. Terumi. Sama will be pleased to see you return. However, looking over the group behind Ulquiorra, his disapproval obvious in his tone and demeanor. These are defectors from Konoha. I can swear to their allegiance. They are no more loyal to Konoha than you. Between them, the captain cast a glance. Forgive me, Cifer. Sama, but they shall be kept under guard until thoroughly questioned. With a guarded expression, Hinata stepped in front of Hanabi. When the guard saw them, he noticed the Hyuga Juinjutsu on their foreheads and tilted his head when he did not notice it. I see. Considering your aid to Kiri and that these are main house members, the questioning should not be complex. With a thank you, Ulquiorra took Hinata's hand in his. The Anbu observed and comprehended this. I see. Would you care to follow us? We shall guide you to Mizukage. Sama and Kazekage. Sama. Gaara is here? Yes. Suna and Kiri are signing a new treaty. Excellent. With a wave of his hand, the captain signaled them through the gate. A ring of ninja closed in on them. Not that the former Konoha Nin took this personally. As a matter of fact, the reception was better than anticipated. They were somewhat prepared for a kunai to be placed against their throat and led to a questioning cell. Without a doubt Ulquiorra's influence. Many people gave them strange looks as they passed through the village between the tall, cylindrical buildings and the rounded ones, but most just stared in curiosity since Ulquiorra was leading them. There were looks of acceptance, or at least respect, directed at him. While they strolled, Hinata huddled anxiously close to Ulquiorra. He held her hand closely while the girl blushed nervously. Like the others, the Mizukage's office was a large, cylindrical structure surrounded by cherry and willow trees. It was situated on a small island in the middle of the village. Hinata surveyed the structure as they walked in. The structure had roughly 7 stories and a large, open center with a spiral staircase leading to the upper levels. Some blue stone, adorned with white waves and the dark curls of the Kiri symbol, was used to tile the floors. She heard a small girl cry, Onichan, and looked up. A small girl, maybe 4 years old, was sprinting in Ulquiorra's direction. She had fair skin with a few sporadic patches of much paler skin around her eyes and all over her body. She wore a red kimono and had long brown hair. She lunged towards Ulquiorra and embraced him. Hinata covered her mouth to keep herself from laughing as she giggled. Ulquiorra looked from Hinata to the girl, then awkwardly embraced the small child. Hello, Rin. This is the young child he rescued from Orochimaru, I see. Buried herself in Ulquiorra's leg, the girl had done. Even at her age, she was quite a small person. Hinata stared as Rin turned to face them and everyone began. Those are the eyes of Ulquiorra. Kun. In what way? Who's that, Oni? Chan? Ulquiorra said, these are my comrades. And this is Hinata. Chan. My fiancé, glancing between the group and Rin. With her hands behind her back and her feet rocking back and forth, the young girl looked up at her with shyness. So, you're Nei, Chan? Hinata turned to face Hanabi, who was pouting a little as he looked at Rin, clearly uncomfortable at the idea of someone taking Hinata away. Yes, Rin. Chan. The young child gave her a timid hug in return. She grinned and gave the young girl a gentle head rub. This is Hanabi, my little sister. Rin gave Hanabi a smile and surprised her by giving her a hug as well. Hello, Hanabi. Chan. With great self-consciousness, Hanabi gave the hug back. As the preferred offspring of the head of the Hyuga, she had not experienced any genuine physical interaction outside of training. It was a strange experience for the conceited little girl. A quiet chuckle escaped from the steps. Welcome back, Ulquiorra. San. There she stood, hands on her hips, grinning broadly, the Mizukage. She gave Ulquiorra a wink, causing Hinata to feel a momentary jealousy of the stunning older woman. Gaara, in his long case-cage robes, was by her side. He gave Ulquiorra a kind smile and scurried over to grab Ulquiorra's hand. Hello, Ulquiorra. Gaara. Gaara surveyed the group with curiosity. And yes, they know. Gaara gave a sympathetic nod. I see. Those prisoners you released from Orochimaru arrived in Suna not too long ago. The same here in Kiri. Good. With hardened eyes, the Mizukage surveyed the group. Do you mind informing me what 4 Konohagakure Jonin and 8 Chunin are doing here? And that dog? Ulquiorra moved to the front. These are my comrades, Terumi. San. They have no love of Konoha. I can vouch for them. Mei cast a dispassionate glance at them, her expression reduced to a small sneer. While I have the greatest trust in you, Ulquiorra, you must understand this. They have been our enemies for some years. Suigetsu moved forward after glancing between the Mizukage and the others. When they saw him, many of the Kiri Nin's eyes widened. I, Hazuka Suigetsu, swear on my position as a trainee of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist, that these deserters have only contempt for Konohagakure no Sato and friendship for Kirigakure no Sato. Mei examined him closely, focusing her gaze on his sword. Momochi Zabuza last held that blade. I hope you are as skilled. No. But I am good enough. Grinning, she gave them another glance. I see you have 2 Hyuga main members and an Uzumaki with you, Ulquiorra. San. Karen moved forward, her head lowered. I'm Uzumaki Karen. A former, she nervously cast a glance at Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra added, at the horrified looks, a former servant of Orochimaru. A medical nin, responsible for keeping people alive, not a true monster. She kept people alive. Rin crept slowly away, gathering around Ulquiorra's side. Karen let out a sigh. No. I was a jailer in the lair in Nami no Kuni. I was not a torturer, but nor was I wholly innocent. You don't have to protect me, Ulquiorra. San quietly replied. After exchanging glances, the 2 cages turned to face Ulquiorra. I have her oath of loyalty, and Orochimaru is dead. She is no threat, he said, nodding. Mei felt a mixture of hatred and mild annoyance as she looked at her. Very well. However, we shall be watching you, girl. I understand, Mizukage. Sama. I am a medic. Nin and I offer my services to help heal my former master's injuries to Rin. Ulquiorra's DNA has already done that. Quietly, Hinata said, Ulquiorra. Kun, you gave her your DNA? She was so happy. A semblance of his previous kindness lingered. Yes. My eyes as well. Orochimaru removed her own. Jugo mumbled, there was a bit too much information there. Karen and Anko made an uneasy shift. Mei saw Anko and her eyes hardened once more, clearly identifying the former Orochimaru servant. She cast her gaze between Rin, Ulquiorra, and the former Otto. Nin. She sighed and her brow softened. I shall trust you on this, Ulquiorra. San. But if either of you, so much as, she gathered herself. If one hair on Rin's head is hurt, Ulquiorra said, you and I will be their bosses. Karen and Anko bowed once more. Gazing between the two ogling entities, Gaara let out a sigh. Ulquiorra, do you have anyone else who vouches for them? Everyone here does, including 2 former prisoners of Orochimaru. Suigetsu and Jugo. Stepping forward, Jugo bowed and reiterated what the Ulquiorra had said, saying that the 2 were good and faithful reformed characters. I think Karen is a stupid bitch, but that is more of a personal issue than a question of loyalty, Suigetsu said, rolling his eyes. Screw you, you son of a bitch. Go to hell, skank. Jugo covered the 4-year old girl's ears and said, deadpan, there's a 4-year old girl here, and her mother is the Mizukage. They both turned to see the Mizukage glaring at them with enraged eyes. She had her hands in front of her, almost prepared for a jutsu. I mean, she's a pain, but she would never hurt anyone, outside of battle, or an argument with me. Mei nodded gradually. She looked at the Hyuga girls for a moment, making them both feel uncomfortable, and then asked, Fine. And the Hyuga are? With a smile, Hinata moved forward to greet Hanabi. I am Hyuga Hinata and this is my sister, Hanabi. We are the only children of clan head, Hyuga Hiyashi. You couldn't have gotten a better response from the Kiri. Nin and Gaara if she had revealed that she was Tsunade's daughter. Well. That explains a lot. Ulquiorra, they will all be questioned. I promise it will not be too invasive. I understand. Take them to the interrogation room. Mei sat at the room's desk and went through her notes. All of the people in front of her were seated in chairs, with the exception of Ulquiorra, who was by her side. An interrogator. Nin, wearing far darker clothing than the typical Kiri. Nin uniform, stood behind each chair. A hand rested on the head of the person in front of them. They were using a truth serum in addition to the Haiden, Kiniku no Shinjitsu, truth muscle. The user of the jutsu gained control over the target's muscles. It was only intended to be used in conjunction with the truth serum and lacked the strength of the Kagame no Jutsu of the Nara clan. It meant that the target was powerless to resist once the serum was consumed. The jutsu was designed to deal with highly trained captives who might have been trained to resist the serum, and it only targeted the jaw. Mei raised her gaze to the group. Ulquiorra's words had been confirmed by the notes. They could all be relied upon. Her gaze lingered on Karen and Anko, but she agreed grudgingly that they posed no threat. As she had pledged to Ulquiorra, the inquiries were brief and direct, refraining from excessively probing into private matters. She was taken aback by the intensity with which many expressed their dislike and hatred for Konoha, especially the shy and well-mannered Hyuga heiress. She gave him another glance and gave a nod. Very well, they're free to move around the village. Thank you. I shall keep an eye on them. Good, now let us administer the antidote and return to Gaara and the others. After the antidote was given and the jutsu was released, they exited the dimly lit room and went back to the entrance. Standing there with Temari was Gaara, and behind them was a sizable group of Suna, Nin and other members. The siblings grinned warmly at them. Ulquiorra gave him a nod and reached to retake Hinata's hand when Ulquiorra turned and said, Hello, Ulquiorra. His sword appeared in an instant. With his blades outstretched and his lifeless eyes staring at him, Sasori stood there. Bawahahahaha. Ulquiorra called out as she saw Kankuro lurking close by, his fingers skillfully manipulating the puppet's chakra strings. Ulquiorra flicked an eye. Kankuro laughed and held his sides, saying, Your face, Cifer. San. It was hilarious. Ulquiorra turned to face Gaara, ready to voice her displeasure, but Gaara was grinning and laughing softly too. All the others were laughing, some more than others. Especially Guy and Lee were laughing so hard they were out of breath. Ulquiorra was giving everyone a positively bewildered look that had Hinata laughing. She soothed him by putting her lips to his cheek. He sighed, casting a menacing glance at Kankuro. So you've taken Sasori's body as a weapon? Interesting, if somewhat ironic. Kankuro gave a shrug. Chio. Sama didn't want to see it wasted. I see. How is she? The slightly grumpy voice said, she is fine, and the elderly woman shoved her way through to Ulquiorra. The small elderly woman then shook Ulquiorra's hand and gave his group a cordial greeting. Taking Rin's hand, Mei surveyed the group. Gara, would your siblings and Chio-san come up to my office? We have much to discuss with Ulquiorra and his friends. Mei's office was on the top floor, and there were still a few Anbu outside to watch over the space. Mei had told them otherwise, but the captain had hinted that they should go in to watch the others. After they had all entered, Mei grinned a little and greeted Rin at her mother's desk, asking, well, welcome again, Ulquiorra. How have you been? Well enough. Anything important happen? He reached down and took out a scroll from his bag, saying, this one. Settled in Konoha, became the ambassador as you know, burned down a few buildings, humiliated them, and left with many important documents. Mei accepted it and read quickly. Her hands trembled and her eyes narrowed as she did so. She handed it to Gara without a word. After reading it, he sighed and pinched his nose. This is the draft of a treaty that Konoha was drawing up for us. The High Daimyo was planning to declare war on Kaminari no Kuni. The treaty would have obliged us to help them in exchange for a territory in the smaller countries in the Southern Sea. If we refused, war would be declared on us. Cunning. You waste your energy on Kumogakure and Kaminari no Kuni, leaving your villages open for an invasion by Konoha, making the countries weaker and easier to conquer. Ulquiorra dug deeper into his backpack and produced additional paperwork. There are more here. The problem with Konoha is that they have let their security lax in some areas. For example, they have forgotten that sometimes no matter what you offer someone, they may still defect. They left most of the important documents locked and sealed. Of course, they forgot to give them a separate key to the main one, which I possess. Mei fumbled through them, her pale, widened eyes reading them. By the kami, this is insane. Each one is ironclad and designed to cripple us. Huddling close to her mother, Rin put a consoling hand on her leg and looked up at the documents naively before yawning with exhaustion. With a gentle pat on the girl's head, Mei picked her up and carried her to the private rooms. She sighed and pinched her nose when she got back. To be honest, fear of this sort of thing is why we signed a treaty. We're the only people in the south aside from a few small kingdoms and nations willing to fight. Kumogakure is too far away and well, there's not much chance they would help us anyway. Gara gave a nod. We're all alone, Ulquiorra. You're pretty much our ace in the hole. Ulquiorra gave a nod. Speaking of that, I should probably reveal who I am. Gara gave a slow nod. That would probably be wise. Mei appeared perplexed, as did the other Sand siblings. Ulquiorra's hollow hole was visible when he opened his shirt. I was, until recently, dead. Mei clenched her jaw in disbelief. Edo Tensai? As he spoke, Kankuro and Tamari tensed as realization set in. No. I was sent back. I was betrayed by Konoha 3 years ago. I was Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoku. Mei scowled. The boy Tsunade ordered executed. The one and the same. How did you return? As I said, I was sent back by Ryo. Sama, the supreme god. He requires me here for a plan or prophesy. So here I am. Back for revenge? Partly. Kankuro gave a nod. Well, I guess you're telling the truth. Hole in the middle of your chest and you know Gara from the Chunin exams. Makes sense. Tamari gave a nod of approval. Mei added, well, that explains your hatred of Konoha. Quite frankly, she was only putting up with this explanation because all the others were more ludicrous and nonsensical. Why tell us? He stood and closed his shirt, saying, to prove to you something. Your hate of Konoha is matched by mine. I offer you my comradeship. I intend to bring the wrath of 3 millennia of hate down upon them. 3 millennia? The Kyuubi's power mingled with my intense emotional pain led to me breaking through the walls of reality into another dimension. There I spent 3,000 years nurturing my hate. I intend to spend it on them. Mei stopped and rested her chin in the folded hands in front of her. I accept your alliance, she said after a long period of silence. For now, though, we will have to keep that a secret from Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. Similarly, Gaara remarked, a tiny smile appearing on his face. We seem to be holding the advantage now. Hinata sighed at her fiancé's pessimism, saying, I fail to see how. Unless you possess the Sanbi and Rokubi, as well as the Ichibi. Mei cast an awkward glance down. They have been taken. Ulquiorra scowled. By who? Akatsuki. They have the Sanbi through to the Nanabi. He shut his eyes and opened them, looking around at the others, saying, I see. It is late. May I suggest we halt this discussion until tomorrow? After everything discussed tonight, food and sleep would be a welcome repose. I suppose you're right. There are a lot of things to think about. On the 4th floor there are spare rooms for guests and ambassadors. There are enough rooms for all of you. Silently, as they all processed this, they departed. Ulquiorra and Gaara hung back, talking quietly. Ulquiorra was quiet and distant, but Gaara was making big, expressive movements. Hinata selected a smaller room with 2 beds, one big enough for husband and wife and one tiny enough for Hanabi. Ulquiorra entered and immediately understood the message. He regarded it and her in turn. He glanced back at his hair and remained silent. You. Ulquiorra. Kun, was her first word. Ulquiorra gave her a look. Can I ask you something? Yes, but be quick. You and Hanabi need to eat. How did you tell Gaara and Shio? Ulquiorra turned to face her, pausing. I told them. No eye or anything? No. With pure pain in her eyes, Hinata averted her gaze. So, you trusted them, and not me. Glancing between them, Hanabi slowly withdrew and shut the door. You. Ulquiorra. Kun, why? I know you were afraid, but why couldn't you show the same trust to me? I and Gaara, we were the same. Do you understand? After giving him a brief glance, she shook her head gradually. Hinata, I was alone for 13 years, save for Iruka, the Hokage, and Gaara and were Jinchuriki. Alone for most of our lives. He ends his statement without saying anything more, but she feels comforted by knowing who he is referring to. I know, but why not me? Why didn't you trust me? He remained silent for a while, and his green eyes flashed a terrifying expression. Because, I knew you would never believe me. Look at me. What have I shown you in my memories? I am not who I once was. I apologize, I shall be more open in future. Hinata started crying. Once more, he seemed chilly, isolating her and shifting the subject. Once more, he displayed clinical behavior by stating what he believed she desired to hear without truly meaning it. Indeed, he would make every effort for her. His heart would not be in it, though. I will be honest with you, no, Ulquiorra, because I trust you. I have tried to commit suicide a dozen times since you died. You know what prevented me from doing so? I knew you would never have abandoned the people who needed you, if our places had been reversed. Hanabi needed me. Father has been beating her and I for 3 years. He stopped and stared with eyes that spanned the globe. She silently sobbed, saying, you kept me here, kept me sane. You were my anchor. As he pulled her in close and gave her an awkward embrace, a strained silence fell. Nothing exists if I cannot see it, Hinata. For all that time, I doubted love could exist, because I couldn't see you. A gentle tapping at the door was heard. Dinner is being served on the 2nd floor. With a sigh, Hinata nestled her head further into Ulquiorra's chest and inhaled his aroma. Hinata, I understand why you chose this room, but, no. She questioned, blushing through her tears, what? Why? Please, it's a little too soon. He doesn't want to spoil it. How could that stupid boy? Okay. Until the day we get married, though, she firmly tapped his chest. Very well. They walked hand in hand to dinner. Packing his belongings, Jiraiya sat in the small shack he shared with Iruka. I'm telling you, Iruka, something big is going on? Doesn't that go without saying? The damn Kyuubi was telling you to find its destined Jinchuriki. I think that implies something big is about to happen. Rather than big, the word Titanic comes to mind. It had been more than a year since the reformed drunk left the damn place. Jiraiya was distraught over Naruto, but he was also filled with rage. He desired a return to the Yondaime and Sandaime era in Konoha. However, Iruka was lifeless on the inside. With sorrow in his eyes, he sat around, hardly eating, and staring off into the distance. Poor man, he held himself responsible for Naruto's demise. He was truly in love with the boy. After being discovered by him in Tsuchi no Kuni, an inebriated Iruka even confessed that he had desired to adopt Naruto. Alas, poor lost spirit. He was surprised that Jiraiya, in his tiny, hidden home on the slopes of Mount Myoboku, had been able to cure him of his alcoholism. Iruka had insisted on accompanying him, claiming that if they granted him his wish, the Kyuubi might talk about the blonde or that the Kyuubi's new Jinchuriki might know something about Naruto. Iruka, the Kyuubi is a guy, don't call him it. It'll probably piss him off. Okay, so who's going to go first? He inquired as they put on their packs. South. Nami no Kuni or somewhere similar. Right. After using their transportation jutsu, the two shinobi disappeared. The Kyuubi lay his great head on his paws and resumed listening to the song of the birds. Bring him to me swiftly. We need each other. It was a quiet dinner. A few quiet discussions took place, but that was all. All that had been talked about weighed heavily on everyone's minds, and they were all exhausted and ready to go to bed. Despite this, the long table of dark wood and the evening sky visible through the large windows made the silence pleasant rather than awkward. The cuisine was rich and warm, featuring fresh seafood as well as seafood from Mizu no Kuni's surrounding oceans. The sushi was excellent, and the fish on the steam plates was perfectly cooked. Great dishes of warmed octopus and seaweed wafted through the air, accompanied by the sweet scent of rice and sake. Particularly Ulquiorra seemed to enjoy the unagi unadon. Before long, they had consumed everything and stood up to rest. Hinata got Hanabi into bed in Ulquiorra and Hinata's room. Ulquiorra peered curiously at the sisters. With a smile, Hinata turned to face him. What, Ulquiorra? Kun? I vaguely remember that you never used to get on 3 years ago. Well, after everything between us and our father, we have been getting on better. With a nod, he faced their bed and undressed, exposing his back's corded muscles. Tracing the curve of his spine and the strong muscles in his arms and back, she blushed. Are you all right to share the bed? He asked, glancing back at her. She said, W. We did so for the last few nights, as she carefully removed her own jacket and lifted off her own top. Ulquiorra's eyes lingered on her stomach, then on the bare skin of her arms. In Rio. Sama's bath, they'd seen each other almost nude, but they hadn't really been looking. They were unable to fully ignore the other girl's beauty despite the younger girl's presence. Stepping out of her shoes and pants, Hinata showed off her long, voluptuous legs. She covered herself with her arms in embarrassment and nervously wiggled her toes. He undid his own pants and shoes, emerging only in his panties. As they took in the sight of each other's bodies, their gazes moved up and down one another. Hinata's body was delicate, a sculpture with soft feminine curves. Her hands and feet were surprisingly small and innocent, and her hips were wide. Her arms were slim. Her waist. Length hair cascaded down her back in a lavender waterfall. Despite his thin build, Ulquiorra had wiry muscles covering every square inch of his body. Considering his immense strength, his arms and legs seemed remarkably slender. His body was hairless except for a dark mane on top of his head, and his nails were dark. Eventually, their need to sleep overcame their desire to look at one another. Silently Ulquiorra got into bed, lowering the cover to allow Hinata to slide in next to him. With hesitation, she reached into her bag and took out her red and yellow yukata. She almost put it on, but changed her mind. She desired Ulquiorra's touch against her skin. Quietly, she put it back in the bag and slipped into bed, draping the quilt over them both. Their nude skin felt smooth and soft against the clean, fresh scent of the futon. Ulquiorra started to turn to face his back, but she stopped him in his tracks with her arm. With her head resting in the hollow of his throat, she leaned forward. Her right index finger traced the tattoo on his chest as her hands sank down and started to trace the muscles of his pectorals. He put his own hands on her hips and pressed their bodies together. Her musk was a delightful scent that filled his nostrils with pleasure. Sniffing at his skin, Hinata curled up against his chest, pressing her body against his. As they embraced for the last time and drifted off to sleep, their breaths blended. The 10-year old Hanabi woke up first, stretching out her body and letting out a big yawn. She stroked her head and sleepily rubbed her eyes. Though she was still getting used to not having her father's watchful eyes upon her when she woke up, she relished the sense of independence. She blushed as she looked up before her eyes slid away. Ulquiorra and Hinata were sound asleep beneath the futon's covers, and judging from the appearance of it, they were nude. She quickly changed out of her still from yesterday clothes, donning a new pair of pants and a shirt. With a quick glance back at her sister and soon to be brother in law, she quickly left, making sure to gently shut the door behind her. Around 8 o'clock, the aroma of a freshly prepared breakfast rose from the ground below. Running downstairs, she sat in a chair at the dining room table, biding her time until the others arrived. Rin started to trickle down with her mother first, and Kurenai followed shortly after. When the Genjutsu mistress saw her, she waved before approaching and taking a seat next to her. "Good morning, Hanabi-chan." "Good morning, Yuhi Sensei," she answered in response. She asked, "Yuhi Sensei, are my sister and Ulquiorra allowed to sleep in the same bed?" As she leaned closer to her while taking a quick glance at the others. Kurenai nodded after pausing. "Yes, they are engaged. It's all right. What if they're naked?" After pausing, Kurenai said, "Pardon me." The door opened and Ulquiorra sighed and looked up. He didn't use his pesquisa because he was still sleepy and asked, "Who's there?" Had he would have guessed who was about to give him the death glare. Kurenai's gentle voice said, "Hinata-chan, please get up." Hinata groaned and made some noises, clinging to Ulquiorra. Hinata, who appeared extremely sleepy, turned and got out of bed, saying, "Ah, fine." She abruptly woke up upon realizing who it was. She cried, "Kurenai Sensei," and quickly grabbed some clean clothes. Kurenai glanced at Ulquiorra, then back at her. With a sigh, she eased up. "Sorry for disturbing you. Hanabi seemed to think you were in bed, naked." Ulquiorra dressed himself without reacting as Hinata blushed. "I am not surprised. She only saw part of us under the covers." Kurenai turned to Hinata, nodding. "Breakfast will be served shortly. You should head down, Hinata-chan. I want a word with Ulquiorra." "Yes, Kurenai Sensei." Ulquiorra completed his outfit, donning his Kiri cloak and Suna gear. His hope was that today would see the start of his war against Konoha, which was why he had brought them here. "What is it you wish to speak to me about?" "Hinata and your sleeping arrangements." Ulquiorra's eyebrows shot up. "We are not ready for that yet. I know. What I want from you is your word that you will not hurt Hinata. Or force her." Ulquiorra froze, staring into her scarlet eyes with his own green ones. "I came back for her. I will never hurt her. Excuse me." He shoved past her and went down to breakfast, leaving Kurenai by herself, staring coldly at his back. Talk soon shifted to the war strategy while they were eating. Except for the group, the principal Suna delegates, and the Kiri higher-ups who had been invited by Mei, the room was empty. The Suna council was prepared and willing to go to war with Konoha, according to Gaara. All they had been waiting for was the command. Mei concurred, as did her council. As they talked, Ulquiorra appeared to be in charge of several important choices. It appeared as though he had been subtly selected to be the main conflict strategist. When asked why, Gaara responded, "Well, for one thing, you are the strongest fighter available. Couple that with your intellect, and you are the best to make the decisions. We'll make our own decisions about the individual battlefields along our borders, but Aizen trained you for war. He left Las Noches under your command, did he not?" Ulquiorra thus assumed responsibility for the ambitious war plan very quickly. He filled a new cup with tea for himself and took a sip. He carefully considered every important figure in the elemental nations. He quickly reached a conclusion. It appears the major concern is first to deal with Akatsuki. Mei sounded skeptical, asking, "Really?" "Yes. Akatsuki has the majority of the Biju. The Kyuubi is gone, but that matters little. With 6 of the 8 Biju, they could effortlessly destroy any nation and take power themselves. Konoha is the main target, but we must take advantage of this. Acknowledging, Shikamaru spoke. You mean we use the international conflict with the Akatsuki to our advantage? He set down his tea and turned to face the 2 Kage, saying, yes. The Akatsuki must be dealt with first. If we can gain the Biju ourselves, we could prevent Konoha or Hano no Taikoku getting them. Akatsuki is spreading havoc across the mainland as we speak, searching for the other Jinchuriki. Due to their power, most of the villages have devoted their resources to combating them and regaining the Biju. Asuma gave a sympathetic nod. They not only know that they have their Biju but the others as well. It's a massive treasure hunt. Correct. Konoha was the strongest village for a time because of the Kyuubi. Without it, though they have the largest army and village now, they risk being destroyed if a Biju attacks. They foolishly denied themselves the Kyuubi, meaning they, more than any other, are keen to capture the Biju. So, your plan is that once we declare war on them, they'll be caught between us and the Akatsuki? More or less. Konohagakure itself would probably remain dealing with Akatsuki so they alone possess the Biju if they succeed. We would most likely deal with the smaller villages under their thrall, which would be the easier target. A councilman from Kiri scowled. So, we allow Konoha to weaken itself against Akatsuki, while simultaneously attacking Akatsuki ourselves and crush the smaller villages at the same time, thereby weakening Konoha further? Yes. Gaining the Biju is the major concern. Ulquiorra finished his tea, and everyone fell silent. Of course there is a flaw in this plan. Kiba muttered, seems pretty flawless to me. He's referring to the fact that we have no idea what Hano no Taikoku would do if we did wage war. Right? Correct, Shikamaru. San. No doubt, due to the close link between the Taikoku and the village, we run the risk that the daimyo will also declare war. Neither Mizu no Kuni or Kei's no Kuni can stand up to a full assault from the Taikoku. As Tamari was speaking, Mei glanced up from her hands. Well, as you said, they would have to divide their attention between us. On top of that, the army is busy conquering more territory. They may be too busy to deal with us. Moreover, their allies may desert them and join us, Shoji added, receiving additional credit. I grant you that is a possibility, but the original point stands. The variables are too many for such a simple approach. Kiba muttered, sounds bloody complex to me. His plan is playing them off against each other. It is hardly complex. It is because of your brainpower it seems complex. Shut up, Shino. The insect user stopped talking. Still, his bugs looked victorious. If I may get things back on track, here is what I propose. I will attack a point of significant military interest for Konoha. I will make no secret of my base of operations being Kiri. Konoha will declare war. Due to the treaty between Suna and Kiri, Konoha and their allies will declare war on Suna as well when you come to their aid. Shino held back. I rescind my previous statement. The plan does seem to becoming pointlessly complex. I am merely explaining. Konoha's major advantage is the large army and number of allies. While I attack, you will call a meeting of the nearby nations. If I recall correctly, there are a significant number in the waters around Mizu no Kuni and Kei's no Kuni. You intend to use your attack as a rallying point? Correct. If we can prove Konoha can be damaged like that, we could gain a significant following. And these new allies would provide troops, ships and ninja to help fight Konoha? Yes. Considering the fact that there are likely to be Hano no Taikoku soldiers there is the increased risk of the Empire declaring war as well. If that is so, the added allies would be a great boon. Let me see if I've got this straight. You attack Konoha, making them declare war on us for harboring you. Suna comes in to defend us, dividing their forces in two. Then, you leak word you are going after Akatsuki, meaning Konoha will then have to divide its attention again to deal with both Akatsuki and you. By doing so, Konoha will inadvertently help you defeat Akatsuki because they will also be fighting them. Akatsuki will also be divided between fighting you and Konoha. On top of this, Hano no Taikoku, if it does declare war, will have to divide its forces between us and expanding. Meanwhile, we just hold out while you get the Biju, and once you've got them, we destroy Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. Yes. Ulquiorra. Kun, that is a ridiculously complex plan. Ulquiorra poured another one for himself. I admit, Hinata. Chan, the plan is rather complex, however, it is also remarkably simple. We simply divide the enemy's attention and duties between as many fronts as we can. Meanwhile, we only have a few things to worry about ourselves. Defense of the borders and the villages and gaining the Biju. Nothing else. Mei and Gaara exchanged glances with one another. Gaara eventually sighed and nodded. Your plan does have some merit. If that is what you think we should do, I have no complaints. Mei patted the table with her fingers. Very well. We'll trust you on this. Thank you. I'll leave presently. First, I will need a target. Ulquiorra, it looks like you just finished eating, Ino said. He turned to the Konoha Jonin and said, the sooner this war starts, the sooner it shall end. I need a target. Somewhere of some significance in southeastern Hano no Taikoku. Guy gave his chin a rub. There is a large fort on the southeastern coast, in the large bay opposite Mizu no Kuni. It has a small fleet of around 4 ships, and a gold mine as well. It's mostly used as a shipwright for the armada there was plans for. Kurenai gave a nod. She paused and gave Mei a quick glance before saying, it's fairly important. There were plans it would be used for. There was a plan for Konoha and Hano no Taikoku to expand east, to the eastern nations. Well, that's good to know, Mei remarked. I would have thought such a place would have a larger guard, Ulquiorra replied. Hubris. And, it's more important for future use. It'll be a sore loss though. One of her councilmen added, Mizukage. Sama, the clan heads should be informed. His eyes slid to Ulquiorra. And, are you sure this plan is wise? We are still recovering from the civil wars. Do we really desire conflict with Konoha? Something like, open your eyes, Saito. Said a councilwoman. The outer islands have been attacked for the last 3 years. The Mizu daimyo is at his wit's end. We've been at war for years now, and we finally seem to hold the advantage. But yesterday we were saying it should be kept quiet. I've given that some thought, Ulquiorra replied. The problem with that is that Konoha is still in chaos. Though it has been some days, they'll still be searching for us. We must start this while they are recovering. Only the shinobi can move at our speed. Word of what happened will only now be spread as travelers leave Konoha. We hold the advantage of surprise and chaos. We must utilize it. After some time, everyone began to support the plan. After informing the clan heads, there was some reluctance, but eventually their approval was given. They were eager to go to war. As Gaara had previously stated, Suna was only waiting for the word. Due to their proximity to Hano no Taikoku, Kei's no Kuni was also ready. Gaara had been told by the Kei's daimyo that he would stand by Suna no matter what. He had had enough of Hano no Taikoku's attacks and intrusions. All they needed to do now was let the Mizu daimyo know. Fortunately, Kiri and the nation's largest island shared the location of the capital. This meant that Ulquiorra, the swift messenger, would hopefully respond to them in a matter of hours. The daimyo was a man of cautions. He was hesitant to grant the ninja excessive authority because he had risen to power during the civil wars that had ravaged his nation. But he cared about his country just as much as the other daimyos did. More than his fear of ninja expansion, his fear was of Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. He turned to face Ulquiorra, doubt and fear weighing heavily on his brow. Your words are powerful. Your arguments clear, perhaps I shall regret this decision. Perhaps not. I shall stand with my people on this matter. My armies will be readied. He departed, entering his palace without acknowledging Ulquiorra's gracious bow and gratitude. When he returned and brought word of the daimyo's backing, Guy pulled out a map of Hin no Kuni and touched the appropriate spot. Last I heard of it there were around a dozen Anbu and at least 40 Chunin. Perhaps 100 normal soldiers. Around 150 enemies. I shall deal with them. I will return presently. Hinata dared him to disagree, saying, no. We're not letting you go alone. He sighed as he observed her resolute expression. Dear dumb girl. He saw Hinata straighten and said, very well. However, only a small team. I shall take 4 with me. I want to protect her from harm. She is powerful, though. Here, I'll put my trust in her. Hinata, Guy, Jugo and Lee yelled, hey, why can't we all come? The fires of our hearts demand battle. Ulquiorra's glare made him stop talking. Mei and Gaara appeared to agree, saying, it would be more demoralizing for the enemy. Their own members attacking them. And it will prove our goodwill to the cause. Ulquiorra was aware that his struggle would not be easy. He raised the hands of all his allies and said, I call for a vote. All those in favor of joining Ulquiorra, raise your hand. Loyalty. Stupid fools. Very well. We leave as soon as we are prepared. After traveling quickly in a ship that Kiri had built and receiving blessings from a powerful east wind, they arrived at the Great Bay a few days later. Disguised as a small trade boat, the vessel glided through the waters like a massive marine mammal. The tiny base came into view. It was little more than a wooden structure with a few small buildings and a dock of wood protruding like a broken bone, bearing the flags of Konoha and the Hano no Taikoku. The ships that were docked there were enormous, brutish vessels with red sails, massive arbalists, and other war-making machinery covered in steel blades. Ulquiorra, standing on deck and pointing out the targets, issued the orders that each would follow as they approached the ship's shadows. The rest had left their hite. 8 behind, vowing never to wear them again, even though they were still dressed normally for the mission. I will lead the assault, aiming to draw the Anbu to me to deal with. Teams 8, 10 and Karen will head up to the fort and see if there is any information to gain there. Suigetsu, Jugo, Anko, you will join Team Guy and deal with whomever you can find. I will be taking on the majority though. If needs be, retreat and draw the enemy back to me in the main landing area. When Hinata gave him a quick glance, he gently grabbed her. How many of you have killed? A pause occurred. Only the Jonin, Jugo, and Suigetsu had killed someone. Do not dwell on it. Finish the enemy as quickly as possible. Move on to the next and forget it. You shall feel ill later, but you shall overcome it with time. He turned to Hinata as they got closer. It was a plea and a command to stay safe. I will come to you if you need help. Just call for me. She gave him a quick kiss while glancing at the others and said, I'll be fine. I am not some dumb child. As the ship approached the dock, a shinobi led by a group of soldiers advanced. With a clipboard in hand, the shinobi stared at it intently, only looking up at Ulquiorra as he got off the boat. Kiri? With just one nod. Cargo? Ulquiorra pointed with a finger and fired a sero, saying, pain. The ninja and soldiers were ripped apart by the green beam, which also vaporized everything in its path. The attack was shorter because he had not used as much Ryotsu as he had intended. It continued to function. The sound of footsteps approaching them signaled the approach of soldiers and ninja. The soldiers' red armor shone in the early morning light, and their swords and spears gleamed. One man exclaimed, surrender. You are outnumbered. Go. You have your orders. He was upon the enemy in a moment. His other hand was used to punch another man in the face, breaking his skull, while his other hand had cleanly severed the head of a man. He made a path with a kick, and his allies ran through it, severing throats and cutting tendons with the blades that slid out. After they had left, Ulquiorra went back to murdering people. Swords and spears were flung aside by him as he used long hand sweeps to rip open throats and deft kicks to break bones. Blood and screams filled the air as bodies were thrown around. He wrenched a spear from a soldier's hand, whirling it around and slicing the man through. He threw the weapon and the corpse into the sea, which was already turbulent from falling bodies and blood from the deceased. Leaping over the horde of soldiers, a ninja pulled out her kunai and lunged for his throat. He allowed the blow to land, shattering the weapon. Leaping backward, the woman pressed her hands into the tiger seal. Ulquiorra sonidoed to and fro, dodging every fire bullet, but the enemy was not so fortunate. Kaiten. Karyuden. The other ninjas were able to escape the friendly fire, but some of them perished from it. Leaping ahead, he seized the female by the throat and broke it, hurling her as a projectile towards the other people. one more ninja came forward. With a cry of Danten, Kengan no Jutsu, he lunged towards him. Ulquiorra felt the rock encased arm smash into his face, breaking loose several teeth and injuring his nose and jaw. He corrected himself as he was thrown back, landing softly and blowing off the man's limb with a bala. Ulquiorra shrieked in agony, his head collapsing as he turned to face the oncoming foes. So far, the plan is working. Let's observe if it does so going forward. Baikugan from Hinata were moving all over the place, watching for potential ambushers as they got closer to the fort. She stopped abruptly and gestured toward a window high up on the fort. Archer. Shino sent a cloud of insects up to the disputed window, shrugging. He gave a nod and shuddered. Unexpected. He's choking to death because he's allergic to the Kakaichu. Kiba flinched. Hinata continued running. She abruptly stopped, tumbling beneath a swiveling blade and delivering a powerful blow with her Shinken Hokuto. The soldier's face contorted in pain as her blow landed in his stomach. He was an ordinary soldier. He spat up half digested food and blood, and she winced and moved away. He gave way and fell, his eyes red with blood. He lost a lot of chakra when her attack ruptured his stomach. She tried not to throw up while covering her hand with her mouth. Ulquiorra had a point. Though unsettling, she couldn't afford to let it get to her head. To let Kurenai know she was okay, she gave a nod. I must employ my standard gentle fist. Otherwise, my chakra will run out too quickly. They kept moving forward and dashed into the structure. It contained a classic wooden fort with elaborate woodwork and several pillars. In addition to a gang of ninja. The Anbu. 3 of them hurried away through a window, while the other 9 paired off against them. Sarutobi, declared the leader, a man disguised as a bird. Bird. Tsunade. Sama wished to know why you abandoned the village. With a snort, Asuma threw away his discarded cigarette and lit a fresh one. Well, I bloody hate it there. I see. Surrender. Hinata said. The others are heading down to Ulquiorra, as the Anbu slipped out of her line of sight. She believed her fiancé could handle everything, so she said, that means Ulquiorra and the others have to deal with all the rest. If you will not surrender, we shall return you to Konoha in chains, or in a box. Asuma grinned. Bring it. If you insist. Hinata's Anbu attacked her, and she veered into a defensive stance. Everyone was now launching their attacks against an Anbu. Shino was fighting at range with his Anbu. The boy from Aburame retaliated by raising a shield of insects and sending smaller clouds of bugs at the man, while the Anbu used Kaden to hold off the Kakaichu and threw Kunai and Shuriken at him. With only their hands moving in jutsu, Kurenai and her opponent remained motionless and silent, but their deadly, focused eyes. Instead of fighting each other physically, they were in a genjutsu conflict. In an effort to outmaneuver the other, they were both trying to control the other by creating intricate illusions around both the adversary and themselves. The others were also experiencing mixed emotions. The young ninja were skilled and their unique just you and abilities were an anomaly to the Anbu, but the Jonin were equally powerful, and even though they were outmatched, the Anbu had more experience and power than the Chunin. They'd never received any training to combat Konoha clan members. On the other hand, their opponents were among the greatest shinobi of their generation and had received extensive training to combat any foe. With her enemy slashing a sword in a circular motion, Hinata waved her arms back and forth. She deflected those blows that came too close with her gentle fist. She launched a raid assault, kicking, punching, and striking as she started to counterattack. Since the Anbu was shrewd and avoided most of the blows that did connect did not actually hit Tenketsu. Instead, they only dealt minor damage and had minimal effect on blocking the chakra pathway system. As Hinata squirmed beneath the man wearing a snake mask, he struck one of the Tenketsu in the left thigh. But the Anbu appeared to see this coming and swung his sword down at her thigh. The blade bit into the bone in her body, causing her to let out a strangled scream. She collapsed to the ground, anguish and rage visible in her eyes. With a draw of the blade, the man produced a pair of manacles. He nearly snapped them off her wrist. But she was able to knee him in the chest as he approached, her knee encircled in chakra. Holding his stomach, he staggered back. She clambered up, wobbling severely. She was having trouble standing straight, and her leg felt like it might give out at any second. She turned to face her opponent as he leapt at her, mustering all her strength to stay upright. She was aware that her father would receive her back. That's why the majority of his strikes had been intended to cause injuries or disablement. She was definitely not going back. The man's right side of his chest had an old wound, which her Byakugan saw. Lifting her hand, she parried the next strike and plunged her hand into his chest, transferring her chakra into her Hokuto Shinken and letting go of it. The man cleared his throat, causing large streams of blood to flow from the edges of his mask. He collapsed to the ground, spluttering and coughing as the blood inside his mask drowned him. He tried to stand up, but Hinata prevented him from doing so. He was killed by a single blow to the back of the chest. She got up, her thoughts empty. She felt little guilt because she knew the Anbu had been violent and cruel in recent years, but the knowledge that she had killed 2 people weighed heavily on her heart and mind. Sighing, she covered her mouth with one hand while the other rested on her leg, attempting to apply pressure to the injury. The opponents had been defeated by the Jonin. Using his blades to open his throat, Asuma had battled his opponent until the very end, leaving behind a fresh wound. Finally, Kurenai had created a false impression of her opponent, forcing the Anbu to stab themselves. The Chunin had fared well too. Everybody had killed their opponent. The neck had snapped under Choji's massive fists. Shikamaru had spent the majority of the battle keeping away from the man, so he had impaled him with the Keiganui no Jutsu. With their jutsu and kunai, Ino and the others were able to approach and cause stabbings or throat openings. With the exception of Karen and Shikamaru, everyone appeared uneasy. The first kill, so she'd always been told, was the worst. People weren't lying for once. She had the feeling that she would pass out. Karen was making sure they weren't hurt, but they were mostly safe. She let out a gasp when she saw her. Hinata. San, your leg. Hinata moaned once more. Karen looked around at the other people. Someone hold her. Thanks, Kiba. Now, she said, reaching up to put her terrified and bite. Marked arm to Hinata's mouth. Bite me. I have a just you that heals people when they draw my chakra by biting me and taking some of my blood. Well, that's a little off, Shikamaru added. Hinata moaned once more. She bit into Karen, who trembled, saying, Fine, thank you, Karen. San. Ulquiorra carelessly flicked the blood from his fingers as he dropped the final corpse to the ground. The battle squad had demonstrated outstanding assistance. Enko used taijutsu to break necks, summoned snakes to poison her adversaries, and stab people with kunai. With his swordsmanship, Suigetsu had cut bloody passages through the enemy. Not surprisingly, Tenten had shown herself to be a master of bukajutsu and a master of battle, taking down opponents with a wide range of weapons. She naturally reacted the same way Lee did after the first kill. Jugo had just killed them all with beatings. Guy and Lee followed a similar path, albeit with a little more sophistication. Ulquiorra rubbed his hand, which was still stinging from the last blow in which a kunai had penetrated his hand. He approached Suigetsu, the closest of his comrades, who was sitting atop a pile of the dead, stepping over the enormous number of corpses on the pier. Ulquiorra bowed his head in his direction. The 7 swordsmen were rightly feared. I'm grateful, Suigetsu said, surveying the pier that was creaking from the weight of the crimson shallows water and the bloodstained ground. Do you think the message used enough ink? I should imagine so. Ulquiorra. San, how many Anbu were there meant to be? Tenten asked, stepping around a man who had been cut in half by Suigetsu. A kunai pierced his eye as he was about to say, 12. None have arrived here, so I would imagine they are up in the fort. 3 Anbu ran toward him as he withdrew and threw it away, hissing in pain. He sonidoed to the ninja, swinging his blade around and waving at the others. He felt these 3 needed to die, and fast, despite his usual reluctance to use his sword. One of the women parried the blow, but one of the men was not as fortunate and lost his head. The other 2 avoided him for a while, preparing to release a jutsu each, but the man was relatively easy to dispatch and the woman was taken out by a surprise bala. Ulquiorra sheathed his blade, looked up at the fort, and motioned for the others to follow. Guy appeared uncomfortable. What is wrong, Guy? Sensei? Lee, what was wrong with those Anbu? Nothing. Ulquiorra. San is burning with power. Of course they were easy for him to kill. Ulquiorra hesitated. I have struggled against the S. Ranked shinobi of Akatsuki. Anbu or ARS. Rank, correct? Yeah. Have the training methods slipped over recent years? No. Then why such powerless foes? Anko gave a bright laugh. Oh, Ulquiorra. Kun. You've been so used to fighting insanely strong and powerful people, that you've forgotten what it is to kill the weak. Ulquiorra gave a slow nod. There is always that. Or simply Konoha never anticipated a strike here and so thought a smaller group was all that was needed. They walked into the fort, Guy rubbing his jaw. Yeah. I suppose so. This place was for later usage. They wouldn't have a massive guard here. Ulquiorra surveyed the lobby area. Cuts and various kunai and shuriken covered the walls. To confirm that the dead were solely Anbu, he looked over the ground. Except for the fatal wounds, everyone was essentially unharmed. A straight flight of steps led upwards at the back of the hall. They pushed up into the fort, past the strangely cut pillar. The fort was small, with only one additional floor above the entrance hall. A few beds were in the corner of the room, which was quite spacious. The remaining space was unoccupied, containing a variety of file cabinets and tables covered in maps. The others had already arrived and were going through the paperwork. Ulquiorra's eyes narrowed as he noticed the blood on Hinata's leg after they instinctively locked onto her. He ran over to her. You are injured. You. Ulquiorra. Kun, she sobbed and gave him a hug. He moved the ripped cloth, ignoring her, saying, You're okay. I'm fine, don't worry. He glanced at Karen, seeing that she was unharmed and trying not to notice how good her legs felt. Did you heal her? Yes. He looked around the group, then kissed Hinata's hand and said, Thank you. I recall there being talk of a gold mine nearby. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Hinata flinched. There was nothing left of the building after Ulquiorra's Sero, just the dead. The gold mine was also taken care of. Beneath a mountain of rock and dirt, Tenten had hidden his enormous arsenal of explosives. At least it appeared that way. It was a deception. Guy had been in error. It was a cache of gold. Nobody would even bother to send miners here because they would be attacked in a matter of days if they attempted to seize a mine. Although there was a lot of gold, their sealing scrolls were fortunately sufficient. She let out a sigh. Her actions had unsettled her gentle heart, as she had been crying about her kills. He remained silent. He just kept her close to him on deck. Like a protective mother, the wind danced around them, caressing their hair with its long, soft fingers. They were sleeping together, awkwardly holding hands, when Anko arrived to tell them dinner was ready. She did not interfere. She lacked the necessary heart. Danzo went back to Konoha and sighed. Now, he had to do the unpleasant business of telling Tsunade that, as far as he knew, Ulquiorra was neither in Suna nor Kiri. He turned to watch Tsunade come. Hokage. Sama. Have you found them? I checked in Suna, but there has been no sign of him. The case cage is in Kiri though. Well, she said, her venomous voice still dripping, he is there too. How do you know? Our gold cache in the bay has been taken. Outposts report seeing a green flash and a small Kiri vessel. All the gold? All of it. And you were in Suna. Why? I hoped you went there. My mistake, I apologize. Well done, young man.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.